Hello, everybody, and welcome to a very special Sunday afternoon live stream. I have a very special guest with me today. I am so excited to finally get to chat with Dr. Nikki. She is the gut microbiome queen here on YouTube and also on Instagram. And I have loved going through her channel and following her for the past couple of years, ever since I really got into the SIBO world, dealing with my own SIBO stuff. And she just has so much incredible information and comes at gut health and SIBO from a different angle than you'll hear from a lot of people, especially on YouTube and a lot of doctors. So I'm so excited for you guys to get to meet her and ask questions. If you do have specific questions for Dr. Nikki, go ahead and put them into the chat. I'm going to try to keep a running total. We might not get to them till towards the end of the live stream, but we'll try to get to as many as we can. But just put like a Q in front of it or a QQQ just so I can see it. It kind of highlights it a little bit more for me so we can make sure to get the questions asked. A quick bio for Dr. Nikki. Dr. Nikki has a bachelor's degree in exercise science and a doctorate in chiropractic. She is also a certified nutritional therapy practitioner and is trained in functional medicine and specializes in SIBO treatment and restoring gut health. And she is also a YouTuber. So I'm going to go ahead and bring Dr. Nikki on. Hello.
Hello.
Welcome. I'm so excited to finally get to talk sort of face to face.
Close enough, I'm gonna count it.
Yeah, we've chatted back and forth on Instagram and on YouTube comments and stuff. So I'm super thrilled to finally have you on the channel and introduce you to
Likewise.
all of my viewers who haven't heard of you before. I'm certain that a lot of them have, because a lot of people have come to me because of SIBO and gut health info. And as soon as you start Googling that on YouTube, you pop up. So I'm sure a lot of people are aware, but I'm super happy to have you finally.
Yeah, well, it feels like it was a long time coming. I still remember commenting on one of your videos. I remember you were dealing with SIBO and you were feeling like you were quite stuck, and I think dealing with iron deficiency despite
Yes.
obviously eating iron, and you just kinda didn't know what to make of it, and I think you were talking about maybe restricting your diet further at that time, and I kinda came out and was like, "Don't get too pigeonholed into SIBO, like, that might not even be a positive breath test that you're putting on screen right now, just, you
Yes.
know, try to heal more so than kill and starve, which is the dialogue we get in the SIBO community." Yeah,
Yeah, and so, funny thing, like, I mean, that was probably, like, 2 years ago or so
I
that
think
we
so.
kinda had that conversation, and I was in that place of thinking, I'm feeling so bad, I need to just keep restricting, find whatever it is that's giving me trouble. Flash, to now, my diet is more varied than it has been in years, like, literally years. I'm eating, beans and, sprouted oats and green vegetables, and I'm even eating einkorn flour made products. Like, I thought I hadn't eaten gluten in like 15 years. And like the transformation in my health and my gut from going through like the SIBO protocol and just getting it under control and
Mhm.
focusing on lifestyle things, it just, it's changed everything for me as far as like my diet and stuff. And so I
Yeah.
feel like you really focus on like the lifestyle factors,
Mm.
and I have found that those are the keys for me as well. So I'm really excited for you kind of to go into that, and so that people, because it's so easy in the gut health, in the health world, just, oh, I need that one silver bullet. I need
Mhm.
that one new supplement. I need that one new protocol, that one new exercise program that's going to change everything. And really, that
It's not
usually
that.
isn't the thing. Maybe one of those things is part of, the puzzle, but
Mhm.
it's a puzzle. And I love how you focus on that.
Yeah. Yeah, and, I think that part of it is that that's human nature, right? Like, we're all kind of looking for the shiny, and we all have that little fleck of ADHD that we want the new product, the new antimicrobial, the new whatever. But then also we have to remember that that's what the internet does, is that it sells you stuff,
Yes.
and the internet and algorithms understand what gets the clicks and the likes and the sells, and it it's kind of a slippery slope because you go into Facebook groups or Reddit threads or YouTube comments, or you watch a YouTuber or an Instagrammer or a TikToker, and 9 times out of 10, they're selling you something, and it's
Mhm,
not that that's intrinsically a bad thing, it's just you come into it with this desperation because you don't feel good, and you already have that twitch of like, "Ooh, I need the shiny," because we're all only human, and then you mix it in with how the internet works, and you get this concoction of people just kind of jumping from one new supplement to the next new supplement to the next new supplement, and they still feel like crap. Meanwhile, there's a giant elephant in the room almost always, like sleep or stress management or the fact that their eyeballs never see the sunlight ever and they're indoors for their whole life, or they don't get enough dietary fiber, or they don't get enough protein, or they don't get riboflavin, whatever it might be in their nutrition.
mhm.
There's this giant elephant in the room that needs to be addressed, and that's a big part of what's holding them back. But here we are just growing the supplement graveyard and
Oh, yes.
consuming, and then we're wondering why that doesn't heal us, right?
Yes. Yes. The way I like to describe it is that finding health is a puzzle, and all the people on the internet want to sell you a one-piece puzzle. Like, "This is the puzzle for your health," and it's like, it never is that simple, and so, yeah, I love
If
that, like,
only.
the trouble is that doesn't go viral. When you start
Yeah.
talking about, "Oh, you need to sleep, and you need to reduce your stress, and you need to exercise," no one wants to hear that.
Myself included.
Same.
Like, we are only human too. I
Yeah.
was just telling students the other day on one of my Q&As for my program that we're only human, myself included. I would much rather stay up late on YouTube scrolling K-pop dance videos until 11 o'clock at night versus actually go to bed on time
Yeah.
and do what I'm supposed to do. Like, this is just it's human nature. But yeah, that stuff, I call them the unsexy basics,
Mhm.
things like movement, stress management, sleep hygiene, bare bones nutrition, like, are you getting enough of the micros and macros that you need to fuel and build a healthy body?
Yeah.
And yeah, they're unsexy, so nobody wants to pay attention to them.
Yeah,
But
it doesn't
the
give you
new
that dopamine hit to go to
yeah,
bed early.
yeah, it doesn't scratch the itch the same way a new proprietary herbal blend might, or a new I remember when that study came out years ago where they had one group of people try to treat SIBO with rifaximin, and then another group did rifaximin plus PHGG,
Okay,
sunfiber,
yeah,
guar,
yeah,
and the PHGG just flew off the shelves after that. It was like that was the it
I
girl
take it.
for a while. And it's great. I love PHGG. I use it all the time. I'm not knocking it, but it's it's usually a little bit more than just a PHGG deficiency keeping
Yeah.
you stuck with something like SIBO.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, I do wanna go, real quick into just hearing from you about your own personal journey and your
Mhm.
story. AI
Can
can
I do that
super
too?
dumb
Is that gonna work on mine?
I don't know. So, if you're on a
Rude.
tablet or a phone, it probably won't, but on a laptop, I don't know. I don't ask me about technology.
You get special privileges as the host,
I guess
apparently.
so.
You
I have
get to do the cool
superpowers.
whatever it is.
Yeah. So I wanna hear about your own personal, like, health journey, and, I like to call it a six-minute story. My friend Lindsay coined that term, six-minute story, so it doesn't have to be like a 30-second elevator speech, or I won't time you, but
Okay,
it doesn't have to, take up an entire hour either. So just
that's
kinda
good.
how you got to where you are, and, your own personal health journey.
Yeah, the short version of a long answer is, how did I get into this? In the most roundabout way humanly possible, I think. But, I learned a lot throughout the process, so it's still valuable, but basically, I would have told you I was perfectly healthy, up through about college-ish when I started having chronic low back pain.
Hmm.
I was a rower and I thought like, "Oh, I just blew out my back with the sport of rowing," and it is what it is. That happens with rowers all the time. But then I stopped rowing and the pain persisted, and at some point, I kind of blinked and I got to be like, 22, 23, and I had had low back pain for 4 years and nobody could figure out why. I was like, "All right, enough's enough, man." Like, I had been to physical therapy, I had been I stretched, I strengthened, I did all the things. So I went to chiropractic school literally to figure out my own back pain.
Mm,
And I tried a bunch of different chiropractic techniques. I tried acupuncture. I tried all the things. And I still love those tools very, very much. But that was never the thing that helped me. For
mm,
me personally, my chronic low back pain, which had gone on for 5 years at that point, vanished when I cut out gluten. And it still boggles my mind all of these years later, again, like 15 or so years later.
mm,
But, looking back, I had these celiac antibodies on some blood testing that I did kind of around that time when I was getting into functional medicine during grad school. Um, and I definitely had some symptoms digestively when I ate gluten and I started putting that together. So I've just lived under the assumption for 15 years that I'm probably a celiac and I don't touch the stuff. But yeah, my back pain went away and that was a really big eye opener for me of like, whoa, I was trying to treat this
mm.
physically and it was more of an inflammatory thing from within. And kind of at the same time, I started getting into seminars for functional medicine and learning about Hashimoto's, and all of that stuff sounded exactly like my mom and what she had dealt with. Oh, your TSH is managed. You've been on levothyroxine for 97 years and you still feel like crap and you can't lose weight and your skin sucks and your hair sucks. And like you have all of these symptoms, um, even though you're no longer hypothyroid because you're managing the number with the medication. So between my own experience and then trying to help my mom, I got pretty well sucked into functional medicine. Um, and it's so hard. It's a little fuzzy to think back to like my IBS story because truthfully, I don't think I had any sort of IBS issues until a little bit later. I started playing with elimination diets and I cut out gluten and dairy from my diet. And I actually think 15 years later, trying to recall it clearly, that was when a lot of my digestive system issues started. I think before then, I would have had like run of the mill mild to moderate chronic constipation, but nothing to really shake a stick at.
Mhm.
Afterwards, I started getting really severe bloating, like the SIBO prego belly bloat. But at the time, this was like 2010. Nobody knew what SIBO was. Nobody was talking about it. We didn't have, the online health summits. YouTube was still in its infancy.
Mhm.
So I didn't know what it was either. But as human beings kind of do, there are trends and seasons to so much. At the time, we were in a trend in like the integrative space where everything was leaky gut,
Yes,
right?
I
Like
remember that.
prior to that, like the it girl was candida. In the
Mhm.
90s and early 2000s, if you went to a naturopath or an integrative doctor, you would have been diagnosed with candida, almost no matter what you walked in with.
Yep.
In that kind of time frame, maybe between like 2008 to maybe 2015, the it girl was leaky gut. And
Mhm.
so when I started experiencing this really bad bloating to a point where I lived every woman's nightmare, and I was actually asked earnestly if I was pregnant when I was not pregnant. It was
No.
at a seminar. Yes, yes, it happened. And I was so flabbergasted. I didn't know what to say, but in retrospect, I should have just said like, "Oh, it's my leaky gut baby." Like, I think that the woman would have understood because I was at an integrative conference at the time, but
Oh
that's
my.
how bad the bloating was. Out to here
Mhm, mhm,
and chronic diarrhea, and I was losing tolerance to foods left and right. Like, I was constantly experimenting with cutting things out of my diet. I joke I did AIP before it was AIP, or
ah,
I did AIP before it was cool.
yeah,
Anything that could be even remotely construed as inflammatory or allergenic,
mhm,
out of the diet. And I scrambled like this for probably about 3 years where I was hacking stuff out of my diet, swilling leaky gut healer upper supplements like there was no tomorrow. I'm talking I probably spent, I would guesstimate, 3 plus $1,000 on L-glutamine,
mhm,
marshmallow, all of the kind of formulations for leaky gut,
mhm,
probiotics, turmeric, you named it, I tried it. Um, and I spun my wheels and I was doing like food sensitivity testing and I was doing all of this functional testing and I kind of ended up healing my gut largely accidentally, funny enough, because I happened to move out of a stressful living situation with a roommate that was difficult. And I noticed, hey,
mm,
wait, my gut is significantly better. Not 100%, but like that actually made a pretty sizable dent just moving out of that stressful living situation.
Hmm.
And at the time, laughably, I thought maybe that roommate was sneaking gluten into my food. In retrospect, no, I think it was the friggin' stress, Nikki. Again, like the elephant in the room of stress here. And I'm like, no, she must have been sneaking something in my food.
Yeah.
Um, but similarly, when I finished school in California and I moved back in with my then fiance, now husband, just no longer being in a long distance relationship and moving back in with him, that knocked it another kind of peg off. And
Okay.
then I confess, I'm a recovering vegetarian.
Oh, no.
I I know. I was a vegetarian from the age of 11 until 23,
Wow.
and
Vision.
I thought, "Oh, I am vegetarian, therefore I'm automatically eating the world's healthiest diet." I will
Yeah.
tell you right now, I was not.
Mm.
But as I kind of was playing with my diet, I reintroduced meat very, very gradually because there was nothing left to eat at that point, right? You hack out everything else, you've gotta have some chicken or something.
Mhm.
But I think that the next kind of stepping stone for me was, funny enough, like taking a zinc supplement because I
Hmm.
think I was hella deficient in zinc for a long time. And then I also just started eating meat and I probably started getting more like B12 and iron and protein than my body had seen in a really long time.
Mm.
But each step of the way, it wasn't the things that I was doing intentionally to heal my gut that actually healed my gut. It was stuff that kind of happened in my life and that I would take notice afterwards and go, "Hey, wait, that this is different now. I
Hmm.
wonder if there's something to it." And it's only in retrospect that I'm able to look back and say, "Oh, yeah, that all actually makes sense." So for me, I think that a really big part of it was the stress, being in grad school, having a kind of nutty roommate for a while, living on the other side of the country from my parents, who I'm very close with, and my now husband, who I obviously love very much. Um, so strides in the stress reduction helped tremendously. Like I said, I think I was probably nutritionally deficient in a lot of stuff, and
Yeah.
just replenishing things like zinc and B12 seemed to help a lot. Um, and then I also really speculate, as I mentioned, I think that the real problem, like the diarrhea, the bloating, I think that didn't start until after I cut out gluten. And
Hmm.
it's so funny because
Seems like it should be the
gluten-free
opposite.
is, well, it's so trendy, right? And it's
Yeah.
so in the last 15 years or so, it's such a big thing. And everybody wants to demonize gluten and say that it's evil and inflammatory. And it can be for some people,
Mhm.
but whether we want to admit it or not, wheat is the number one prebiotic source in the American diet. And so when you take a population where only 5% of that population gets enough dietary fiber,
Mhm.
and then you take away the main source of prebiotic fiber, I going gluten-free can make dysbiosis much worse, and I kind of speculate that that's what happened with me. I think that maybe I was already a little bit rocky because, again, years of veggie burgers and tofurkey and God knows what I was eating, and then stress, and then I took away the one prebiotic I had in my diet, and then my microbiome just kind of went to bits.
Yeah.
So, anyway, that's kind of my perspective on it now many years later.
Yeah. When I first started going gluten-free, well, my sister and my mom are both celiac, so I was like,
Mhm.
"Well, I should probably cut it out too." I
Yeah.
ended up getting, the genetic test, and I don't have the genes for celiac.
Hey.
Fantastic. Um, but I still was like, I still shouldn't, obviously, I shouldn't eat it. But what I found, probably like 10 or 15 years ago when I first started going gluten-free is I would go obviously and get the gluten-free version of whatever I wanted.
Pop-Tarts. Yeah.
And I noticed it, and it wasn't until, retrospect, when I really went back, like, was thinking about it after, I was like, my digestive issues, I always responded way worse digestively to the gluten-free version of the thing than I did from the wheat. Like, I
Yeah.
was mostly cutting out the wheat because I knew it was bad, not because I specifically had a digestive issue from it. I was like, "No, I
Mhm.
just know it's bad." But then I would go and eat, some gluten-free bread that has xanthan gum and brown rice flour and, all the things, and
A
that
lot
would
of simple
that would
carbs.
make me bloated. And
Yeah.
that looking back, I'm like, "That should have been a clue." Not that I'm
Yeah.
saying that I should have, continued on the wheat necessarily, or at least, conventional wheat, but at the same time, it's like, let's just put this in perspective here.
Yeah. Well, or like maybe if you had known the thing about, again, the 95% of Americans don't get enough dietary fiber, and then you take away the main prebiotic fiber source from your diet, maybe you could have replaced that prebiotic with some of the stuff behind me, right? Like
Mhm.
avocado and butternut squash and apples. And if you had maybe made an effort on that front, then maybe you could have reaped the benefit of going gluten free while also not tanking your microbiome.
Yeah,
But,
totally.
here we are now, so
Yeah, yeah.
coulda, shoulda, woulda. I wish I had
Right.
done the same for that matter.
Hindsight is 2020, and I definitely resonate with what you said about accidentally healing your gut,
Mhm.
where that's happened to me many times where I try so hard with my iron stuff. I was trying everything for like 3 years, every iron supplement, every like protocol, every other day iron, take it with vitamin C, address stomach acid, like all the things I did. And I still didn't get to the bottom of it. I feel like I made some strides with it. Like my health definitely improved and it helped a little bit, but not enough for me to not have the iron deficiency symptoms.
Mm.
And then kind of randomly, I got my hands on a red light therapy panel and I started using that. And within a couple of weeks, my iron deficiency symptoms went away. And
Really?
within a month,
Ooh.
I went and got my blood tested, and my hemoglobin was higher than I've ever seen it ever.
What?
And a month later, my ferritin had gone up 10 points. And I'm like,
This is
I don't know,
deeply intriguing.
but
Huh.
I didn't even go into the red light therapy thing thinking this is going to be the thing that's going to fix my I was just like,
Why
oh,
would
this is
you? That's
cool.
nuts.
Yeah, and it kind of just landed in my lap and it's like like my brain function is back, like all of the symptoms
Oh,
of iron deficiency so I definitely resonate with like I have worked for 3 years doing every possible thing. Like I was thinking of going lion diet carnivore to try to get this fixed.
yeah.
And just landed in my lap this red light therapy and
Yeah.
I give
Well,
up.
this is it's so interesting too. Like it's been a hot minute since I've taken any type of classes on like red light therapy and photobiomodulation.
Yes.
Add that to your
Yeah.
Scrabble word bank, by the way, fun word.
Yeah.
But I do vaguely remember from classes I took many years ago that now, depending on the wavelength and like how
Mhm.
it's used, red light therapy can increase glutathione production.
Mhm.
It's particularly soaked up by hemoglobin. So once it gets
Yeah.
soaked up by the hemoglobin, that travels around your body and can affect all sorts of tissues,
Yeah. And I'm
increases
trying
blood
I'm like
flow.
in retrospect, I'm like trying to find information about what this is doing in my body. And there's not a lot of info about specifically anemia or iron deficiency and red light therapy. But I mean,
It's
there's
new to me. Like,
it oxygenates your cells. And I'm like, oxygen, the iron deficiency
yeah.
symptoms are a symptom of low oxygen.
Mhm.
So, but I don't know how it all works together. I'm still like trying to piece it together. But it's one of those things where it's like, I didn't, do my research and decide this is the thing that's going to fix me. No,
Yeah.
it just happened.
Well,
And crazily enough, it's not a diet change. It's not a restriction. It's an
yeah.
addition to my lifestyle. I didn't have to change my diet. It was, anyways, another emphasis on diet isn't the only lever, and
Yeah.
maybe not even the most important lever in a lot of cases. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. That is fascinating.
Yeah,
You know,
I'm
it's
still in the midst of figuring it out, and watching my
well,
blood work is so fascinating.
you could kind of just classify it as doing something anti-inflammatory for
Yeah,
you, because again, you're stimulating blood flow, you're oxygenating tissues, you're increasing glutathione, like, you could just broadly kind of lump it under you did something anti-inflammatory and health promoting for your body, and then it the body has a weird way of healing itself when it gets the tools it needs.
yes.
We don't always have to understand it. I mean, the human frontal lobe and the human ego loves to understand. We love to make a story out of it. We love to put it in our little spreadsheet with data points,
Mhm.
but we don't have to understand something in order for it to work. So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah,
great.
and then also it's like, I added this red light therapy, but I also had done a lot of other things like healing my gut and
Mhm.
starting to exercise consistently. And so it's like if
Mm.
I had just added red light therapy 3 years ago, would I have gotten the same results? I mean, you always have to take into consideration the context of the body and where
Yeah.
it's at. And so it's like it's another one of those pieces of the puzzle. Apparently, the red light therapy was a pretty big piece for me. And, once I got that into place, things started clicking. But all the
Yeah.
other pieces, very important also.
Yeah.
So it's just another
And I'm
one.
glad you said that. It's not necessarily that red light therapy or like the new trendy probiotic is going to be the silver bullet
Exactly.
that fixes everything, but if it's a part of the puzzle to your earlier point
Yeah.
and you're kind of looking at things holistically and just trying to move yourself towards health holistically, then it could be a piece of that puzzle for you.
Yeah, and then depending on who you're listening to, like for me talking about red light therapy, it kinda sounds like, it's a silver bullet for me because
Mhm.
it was that, one of those final pieces of
Yeah.
the puzzle, and so and with every single thing, like diet or exercise or whatever, for somebody, it was their silver bullet or their, one of their
Yeah.
final pieces that really made things click into place for them. And so I just, try to keep that in my mind listening to people like, they had that result from it, but that was because they had all these other things in place, and
Mm.
that was kind of the final thing. So anyways, I do wanna talk about SIBO,
Okay.
because you are a SIBO expert, and I mean, you're the gut microbiome queen, so, we gotta get all of your SIBO wisdom here. So in the and I don't want to say conventional world because SIBO is, I mean, it's starting to become, more of a conventionally known thing, but
Mhm.
even in the natural world, the typical way that you go about dealing with SIBO is you go get a SIBO breath test. Think you might have SIBO, you go get a SIBO breath test. If it's positive, obviously the first thing you do is you go on a SIBO diet and you cut out the foods that, are making the
You
SIBO.
gotta starve them, right?
You got to starve them, and then you take away the probiotics, fermented foods. Obviously, those would be a bad choice if you have too much bacteria in your small intestine. And then you go down the road of healing, and there's usually three options. There's the antibiotic route, the rifaximin, like you talked about earlier. There's the natural antibiotics, the antimicrobials,
Mhm.
and there's the elemental diet. So you choose, which one you want to try
Pick your
first.
poison.
Yep. And basically you just go through that cycle. You do your, whatever you decide on your treatment, then you take another breath test. If it's still positive, then you keep
You do
going
it again.
harder. You go harder on
Mhm.
your diet. You take away more fermented foods. You go on another round of whatever
Yep.
treatment. Is that
And
how
it just
you approach?
repeats.
Is that how you approach SIBO in your practice?
1,000% no. And I was chuckling because I was thinking, "Oh, I really hope that people don't tune in for just this 1 minute that you're saying right now
I'm
and then
being
leave,"
to
because
my question.
they need to hear the follow-up to this, which
Yeah.
is I vehemently disagree with so much of what you just said. But to be clear, that's what pretty much everybody is doing.
Yeah.
And I feel like, honestly, being in this world was very lonely
Mm,
until I started doing my podcast with my friend Amy Hollenkamp because she
great podcast.
deals with SIBO in a very similar way. And so we finally were like, "Oh yeah, you get it. You get it. Oh." And now I have a friend, but I swear to God, it's just us on an island and everybody else is crackers. But basically, it's what you described. It's that you you diagnose the condition with a breath test, and then it's the cycle of kill, starve, kill, starve, kill, starve, and then you repeat the breath test, and if the breath test is not better or you don't feel better or both,
Mhm.
then you not only continue that cycle, but you typically do it more aggressively. "Oh, just rifaximin didn't work? Let's layer in rifaximin plus this other thing. Oh, this degree of dietary restriction didn't work. Let's whittle it down less. Oh, now we need to do elemental," whatever it might be. And I will say I typically get my hands on people after they've done this cycle about 5 or 10 times.
Yeah.
So they've dug themselves a pretty deep hole by the time I get my hands on people. But it if I may, you just opened a huge can of worms with this, by the way.
Oh,
and I'm
dear.
gonna try to be concise, which is not necessarily my strong suit in life.
Right. We got plenty of time.
I have 300 something YouTube videos for a reason, people. Like there's a lot of stuff to piece apart in this. The first thing that I'll say is that SIBO breath testing is horrendously inaccurate to the point where I have not run a single SIBO breath test in easily 3 or 4 years.
Hmm.
I don't feel that it's necessary to get good results with this population. That's important. But also the whole foundation that we built this on is erroneous. And
Hmm.
so it's really hard to gather information using this breath test. And basically what it ends up being is that and let me know if this was your recollection of breath testing when you had it done. You drink a sugar substrate,
Mhm.
usually glucose or
Lactose.
lactulose.
Yep.
You drink the sugar substrate and then you breathe into some tubes or some bags
Mhm.
every 15 minutes or so. And it depends on the test, but usually it'll be about 2 hours. Sometimes it's 3 hours.
Mhm.
And then you mail that collected gas out to the lab, and then they give you this nice graph.
Yep.
And every lab in every country, they will have a line somewhere on that graph that says, aha, right there. Anything on this side of the line, the magic line,
Mhm.
is coming from esophagus, stomach, or small intestine. And everything on this side of the magical line is coming from your colon. So if you have any peak happening over here,
Mhm.
that's what we diagnose as SIBO. Bada bing, bada boom, you're off to the races. But the problem with this is that we don't know where that line is for you as an individual.
Yep.
We have no way of knowing this, none whatsoever, unless you happen to be one of the few people who does a breath test where they put a radioactive isotope in that sugar substrate and then they follow the radioactive isotope all the way down with x-rays every time you do a breath test. Or I'm
Right.
sorry, every
'Cause it
time you
could
do a breath
change.
collection.
Your transit time could change from day to day, right?
Well, that's another wild card too. So there's individual variation. Like it's called oral cecal transit time. Basically, the time it takes for the sugar to make it from the mouth to the cecum, which is the first part of the colon.
Mm.
And again, that's the line of demarcation that we're looking for. Small intestine versus first part of colon.
Mhm.
And my oral cecal transit time is almost surely different from yours versus anybody listening right now. But you're right, it could also vary a little bit day to day. And so there's this huge wild card. And the whole basis of how we're interpreting this test with this magical hypothetical line, it's a farce. And
Mm.
also, countries don't even agree on this. The United States will usually use a 90-minute cutoff, but in Europe, they usually use a 60-minute cutoff.
Mhm.
What do you do with this?
Yeah.
So this is why I've just abandoned SIBO breath testing altogether, quite frankly, because it's not worth the time, the money, the effort.
Mhm.
Also, you could feel like absolute dog shit when you drink that much glucose or lactulose for the
Right.
sake of
Not fun.
this test. So I would just assume save myself and my patients the headache and not even embark on that.
Yeah.
But part of why I get away with doing this is that I'm pretty comfortable saying if it looks like a duck, waddles like a duck, quacks like a duck, I'm just going to assume it's a duck. But I could do that because the way I treat SIBO does not involve killing and starving to the degree
Mhm.
that you see in the mainstream.
Yeah.
If if I was doing prescription antibiotics or heavy-handed rounds of herbal antimicrobials or really restrictive diets or heaven forbid the elemental diet, then maybe I wouldn't feel comfortable doing those things without some sort of confirmatory test behind me.
Right.
But I don't I don't typically do those things anyway.
Yeah.
Um,
The types of treatments you do are just generally health promoting.
yeah,
So even if you didn't
gentler.
happen to have SIBO, it would still be a net positive.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I talk a lot on my channel and on the podcast about this idea of building a SIBO-proof body.
Yes.
And
I love
then if you have SIBO and you become SIBO-proof, then the SIBO can just fall away all on its own because
yeah.
it no longer suits your physiology.
Mm.
If for some reason you actually do not have SIBO, there's no harm, no foul in building yourself a SIBO-proof body. Because
Yeah.
really it just boils down to becoming healthy, resilient, and strong, and making your microbiome healthy, resilient, and strong. And you could do that largely with no harm, no foul. So that's how I choose to go about it.
Yeah, I love that so much. If someone were suspecting they had SIBO and they were thinking of getting a breath test, and now they're thinking, maybe that's not worth the money because it is not a cheap thing to do.
$100
Um,
at least.
yeah, what kind of symptoms would you look at and say, yeah, that looks like SIBO?
Symptoms are a little tricky because the symptoms can be similar from one condition to another. So,
Right.
like the symptoms of candida overgrowth or yeast overgrowth versus SIBO versus run of the mill dysbiosis, which is just an imbalance in the microbes in the ecosystem, um, versus like IBS, which is going to have more visceral hypersensitivity kind of stuff going on.
Mhm.
Like the symptoms are going to be very similar, which is part of what makes this space a little bit complicated.
Yeah.
The hallmark is usually gonna be bloating, um, particularly postprandial or post-meal bloating. So
Mhm.
maybe you wake up with a relatively flat tummy, and then you eat a meal and you get bloated, you eat another meal, you get more bloated, you
Yeah.
finish the day
I
and you look 9
definitely have
months
that.
pregnant.
Definitely.
Um, all of these conditions can present with diarrhea, constipation, or mixed bowel habits.
Mhm.
A lot of people will describe a feeling you could kind of loosely call it indigestion, but that feeling like you have a brick of lead in your gullet and
Mhm.
just it's like nothing's moving.
Yeah.
Like you have this thing sitting in you and it's not budging for
Mhm.
hours and hours. Um, so that's what I would say for symptoms. What I think is more pertinent for SIBO is looking at sort of the root cause story for the person. So if you could think back to when the symptoms of bloating or altered bowel habits or pain or whatever started, kind of look around the 3 to 6 months prior to that symptom starting and examine what was going on there. With
Mhm.
SIBO specifically, you see this a lot with food poisoning, and I've heard so many variations of the story of like, "Oh, I ate a hot dog at a street vendor in downtown Chicago." This was a real one, by the way. Hot dog at a street vendor in downtown Chicago, and I got horrible, horrible food poisoning, and I was never the same since.
Mm.
Or, maybe it was funky fish or eggs or chicken or whatever it might be, but food poisoning is a really big one for SIBO. The other biggest one probably is gonna be some sort of stomach acid suppression therapy. So things like Prilosec, omeprazole, Protonix, the proton pump inhibitors
Mhm.
especially, and then maybe to a lesser degree, the H2 blockers like Zantac could potentially mess with that. But those are the 2 biggest root causes I see for SIBO specifically, not necessarily like dysbiosis or candida or some of the other stuff we talked about.
Okay. So there's one kind of recurring comment that I'll get since I've expanded the diversity of my diet since dealing with SIBO.
Mhm.
I will get people commenting saying, "Why would you add back foods that caused your SIBO in the first place?" As
They
if,
didn't cause the SIBO in the first place, like, easy, easy answer.
yeah,
It wasn't the oats
there's
and
kind
the
of an
wheat and the
idea
whatever.
that yeah, there's kind of an idea that it's like the whatever diet you were eating caused the problem, but you just outlined uh, um, food poisoning
Mhm.
and the proton pump inhibitors or whatever,
Yeah,
and those are more like actually causing the problem, and it's not necessarily caused by a bad diet, a
no.
bad diet.
Well, I'll one up you on this too, is that or not one up, but I'll add to the conversation. We have 0 evidence, and I have 0 clinical experience seeing that a poor diet can cause SIBO,
Okay.
right? Like, I have yet to see that where we talked about the root causes of the story and did all the history, and I thought, "Gosh golly gee, it's just because you were eating shit." There's always something else that was happening, and again, it might not be that the root cause or the trigger happened on a Tuesday and then the bloating started on Wednesday. It could have been bubbling for a few months. Like
Mm,
food poisoning pretty classically, you have food poisoning, it sucks very bad. Then there's a period of time where you feel okay, and then maybe a few months later, the sort
wow.
of IBS, bloaty, SIBO-y stuff starts to creep in, and there's a whole mechanism of why it happens that way. But That's why when I talk about root causes with my students and my patients, I like to look at the 6-month window before symptoms started or before a really big flare started, for that matter. Um, but yeah, there's something else that perturbs the system.
Yeah,
There's so many people walking around eating absolute garbage, and they don't have SIBO necessarily
right.
because of it. But the step further that I wanted to throw out there is that we have 0 evidence that any diet can treat SIBO.
Okay.
I've looked. There's 0. We have an abundance of research stating that these quote unquote SIBO diets, including but not limited to low FODMAP,
Mhm.
disrupt the microbiome and deepen states of dysbiosis, probably making it harder to heal. Like, that's actually been very, very well documented.
Mm,
But we have no evidence whatsoever that any restricted diet or any SIBO diet can actually treat SIBO. It is a symptomatic band-aid, and that is valuable in the short term while you're kind of getting your ducks in a row and you're trying to actually get at the root causes and build yourself back up and become healthy and resilient.
mhm.
But we mustn't mistake SIBO diets with a treatment. And that's one of the biggest SIBO mistakes I see going is that people think they're treating with the restricted diet and they're not. It's a band-aid.
Yes.
There's a big difference.
Yeah, and I have a lot of compassion for people because and I've been in this exact place myself where you're having digestive problems and you cut out certain foods and you feel better, and it
Yeah.
just makes logical sense. That food is bad.
Mhm.
And so and it's just it's such an easy mistake to make. And then at the same time, it's like we do live in an environment where there are some kind of bad foods, talking about ultra processed foods and stuff.
Mhm.
So it's really hard to like uh, wade through that. So maybe we can go into diet a little bit because, we talked
Yeah.
about the breath test and, conventionally you're going to go get a breath test, see if it's positive or negative. You're saying maybe don't waste your money.
Don't bother.
You can
And I
probably
saw some people were commenting about the food marble device, and guys, that's gonna have the exact same problem that a conventional lab would.
great.
Because
Yeah,
again, you don't know where that line is between small bowel and colon.
yeah.
And there's actually some other problems, I think, with the food marble device. I have a whole video on it on my
Okay.
channel.
Okay.
But I don't recommend breath testing in any way, shape, or form, including the food marble device.
Yeah. I've had people ask me like, is your SIBO gone? And I'm like, well, my symptoms are gone. I
Mhm,
didn't go back and get one final breath test at the very end,
mhm.
partly because I started listening to you, and I was like, "Well, I really don't wanna waste my money," and at the same time, I'm like, "My symptoms are all gone, like, what is it gonna matter if the breath test comes back and it's still high when
Yeah,
I
would you
feel
treat? And
great?"
you and risk mucking stuff up?
Yeah, yeah.
I'll I'll throw this out there too. This one's kind of a mindfuck, if you pardon the expression. So there's one paper in particular, it's a couple years old now, so I really hope that they're gonna repeat this. But there was a study where they were doing aspirates and basically sucking the juice out of the SIBO to
Mhm,
see, like, what was in there and what made up SIBO. Um, and gosh, it's been a couple years since I read the study, so hopefully I paired it back to you properly. But basically, they were able to show that the degree of overgrowth or the quantity of bacteria in the bowel did not correlate with symptoms whatsoever. The
huh,
thing that did correlate with symptoms very well is the degree of dysbiosis in the small bowel. So, in the SIBO space, one of the things that's talked about a lot is this idea of like, you have too many bacteria and we need to get you down to here, right? You have 10, we want 5, and we need to subtract 5 to make that happen. It's math.
mhm,
But that doesn't appear to correlate with symptoms very tightly. However, if you look at that dysbiosis thing that I mentioned earlier, that balancing act between good microbes and bad microbes in an ecosystem, the people with worse symptoms in this study had more dysbiosis, and it
mm,
was irrespective of the total quantity of bacteria that they had. So, I've likened this before. My favorite analogy is, let's say you have a party and the room that you're in has a maximum capacity. Let's just say it's a huge room. The maximum capacity for that room is 100 people.
mhm,
Well, let's say your party gets really rip roaring and somehow you manage to cram 150 people in that room. you might suspect that that's a problem, but what if you and your friends are like super duper nerds and it's a book club meeting and you're all like sitting around in your sweater vests eating
Ah.
brie and sipping on wine and it's a totally chill, quiet party
Mhm.
and you're all keeping to yourself and it's not rowdy. That would be a quantity problem, but it's not necessarily gonna be problematic if the quality of the people in the room is not problematic.
Mm.
Versus you have another party, and let's just say, and apologies for people, this is just gonna paint a picture, but I'm gonna insult probably at least one person.
Oh,
Let's
dear.
say that all of your friends are like axe murderer, biker gang, rowdy, like
How do you know who I hang out
metal
with?
list I don't know, I'm just trying to paint a picture. But, like, the rowdiest people on earth, and
Mhm.
also they're all axe murderers for some reason.
Mhm.
Now, even a group of 50 of those people in one room could be disastrous, even though you're not anywhere near that maximum threshold for the room, and that's kind of what I think we're getting at with this research study and some others that have followed, is that it's not necessarily the quantity of people in that room, it's who is in the room and how rowdy are they and how inflammatory are they.
Right.
So, I also would suggest to people who are open-minded to this that even theoretically, if you have SIBO, it might not matter. The number, the quantity might not matter. And we need to be treating this more like a dysbiosis condition and talking more about the ratio between the good and the bad and trying to feed and nurture our good guys rather than just inhibiting the snot out of the bad guys.
Right, and then the whole idea is, with, like, antimicrobials and antibiotics is just to kill. So we could go into the party with this analogy could get really really
Oh,
messy.
it's already off the rails. Let's
We
just
go
run
into
with
the
it at this
party
point.
and we murder everybody.
Yeah, you go in with a bazooka,
The
right?
nice people and the axe murderers, and
Well, and here,
that's gonna
let's just
end up
bring this
causing
all
more.
together. Let's just bring this together. So let's say that there's 2 parties. So we've got, like, the book nerds, and we've got the axe murdering, heavy metal listening I don't know, whoever over here.
I love it.
Let's say we go into the first party of book nerds with a bazooka, and we just take out, like, half of the people in that room. That might get the attention of the bad guys who were just outside the door. Because here's the thing too, is we all have some bad microbes in our gut at all times. And that's okay. That's actually really good. They're stimulating and educating your immune system every day. And it's like this little constant reminder for your immune system of, hey, you should really do a good job because look, we
Interesting.
have E. coli and candida and God knows what, and these guys are going to get real rowdy if you don't keep them in check. So we want those little bits of bad guys in our gut at all times, but if we go in and obliterate everything else,
Mhm.
that might actually create a niche for the bad guys to bloom and get out of control. And now we have the second party on our hands rather than the first.
Right. That's a really good mental picture. That makes a lot of sense. Even
I
though
wanna know,
it's a little
like,
messy.
what convention center is this happening at that we have, like, the book nerds of the US, in one room, and then in a neighboring room, we have, like, Axe Murderers Anonymous meeting in the other
No,
room.
no, I'm staying far away.
Yeah.
Okay, so we talked about the breath test, and then
Mhm,
on the diet, some people will say that you can just go on a starve SIBO diet
mhm.
and you don't feed the bad bacteria, therefore they will all die. Um, and you're saying that that is not supported in the literature.
Not that I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Also, again, it's sorta goes back to if it's unnecessary, why would you put yourself through that? Like, even
Yeah.
if theoretically it could work, why would you go through that misery and deal with it that way when there's an easier, gentler, more holistic way of going about it? Like, I
Okay.
just why would you pick the harder way, I
And
guess?
if you did go on a starve SIBO diet, are you starving the book nerds too?
Yes, and
How
that's
possibly?
look, this is really growing into this beautiful thing that we've developed here, I love it.
Now they're all locked into the convention center, and we control what goes in and goes out, and
Mhm.
so we can,
Yeah,
starve them to death.
apparently.
We can't
We can
selectively
take
only
away the
starve
pre.
the axe murderers, right?
Yeah, yeah, Yes, so that is a big problem with SIBO diets. Again, A, we have 0 evidence that they actually treat or starve SIBO, period. 2, we do tend to starve the good guys. Now, the diet that we have the most research on for this is the low FODMAP diet. And I feel like that's kinda like the little baby beginner SIBO diet for a lot of people, and then later on, they might get into biphasic or like the Alison Seebecker, like
Mhm.
low FODMAP SCD kind of combo or some other
And
variation.
now carnivore is becoming a very popular option.
Yes,
Yes,
yes, it
and that's
is.
like, extreme low FODMAP.
Yeah. There was one I will say for people because somebody since we're on your channel especially, somebody will probably point this out. There was an attempt at a carnivore diet SIBO
Yeah,
treatment article some years ago. I wanna say it was 2022. And it was getting some press. I forget. There's like some YouTuber guy who talked about it, I think. Um, Here's the thing though. I read that study and it was shit. Poop pun always intended with me, by the way. It was a very low quality study. They, if I remember correctly, again, this was like 3 years ago, but if I remember correctly, they used lactulose breath testing to diagnose SIBO, which we just covered is wildly inaccurate.
mhm,
Lactulose gives about an 88% false positive rate. So it's a crapshoot whether these people actually had SIBO. They probably
right,
did not since they were using lactulose. Number 2, if I remember correctly, it was a very small study. I think there was only like 5 or 6 people
yeah,
maybe in the
it was
study.
tiny. Mhm,
Um, I believe they didn't reassess at the end. I think they just asked them like, "Hey, are you feeling better?" Which like, that's okay for me to do clinically because that's really what matters to people, but when you're doing something in research, we need to be a bit more rigorous than that, and we need to confirm that the thing we think we treated actually was treated.
yeah,
Um, Granted, it would have just been another shitty lactulose breath test, at which point, why
sure.
bother? Um, and also, I happened to notice that I could not find this article indexed on PubMed. I had to go to Google Scholar, and I had to dig for it, and it's I don't know if this makes me a research snob, but if something's not indexed in PubMed, that's automatically kind of red flaggy for me that it's low
Mhm,
quality.
mhm.
Um,
So I
so
I
anyway,
listened to, an interview with the guy that ran that study, I believe, on a carnivore channel, and it it was like towards the middle or the end, he said that the participants were on, like, oregano oil and some kind of antimicrobial also, and I was like, "Wait,
so it was
so
not
is it
just
the carnivore
diet.
diet treating it, or is it?" So I was like, and it didn't seem like it was, like, upfront information.
Yeah,
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 it kinda smelled a little weird to me too.
yeah. So if we exclude that small, poor quality, questionable study,
Mhm.
we have no good reputable evidence that these diets treat or starve SIBO in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of information, like, we as humans have been studying the low FODMAP diet for about 10 years. I think that coin was the term was coined 10 or 15 years ago now, and so we have a pretty good understanding of why high FODMAP foods can cause bowel changes and
Mhm.
GI disturbance in some people, and, like, we kind of have our heads wrapped around the mechanism pretty well, and it does not appear to have anything to do with feeding bacteria, SIBO-y kind of stuff.
Okay.
It's high FODMAP carbohydrates draw water into the bowel as an osmotic laxative, and for some people, that can cause cramping and bloating and pain, and it's because of that visceral hypersensitivity thing that I mentioned
Mhm.
earlier. If
Mhm.
your nerve endings and your muscles, like, in and around the wall of the intestine are hypersensitive, then any little stimuli is gonna be painful to them, and if you get that pain perception because now you're drawing water into the bowel and it's creating some gas and some pressure, the nerves feel the pain, and then what do the muscles do? They clamp down and then you get more pain, and so you get this cycle of pain and cramping and distension and, like, weird bowel habits, but again, it doesn't appear to have much to do with feeding the SIBO. It's more of a visceral hypersensitivity, osmotic laxative kinda thing.
Okay. So so if you can't treat SIBO with diet, then it's fine to just stay on the Oreos and the ding dongs and going through the drive-through every
Yeah,
day,
for sure.
and so where does diet come into play for you as far as treating SIBO? if it's not treating it directly.
Yeah. You're a mind reader too, because I was thinking to myself, "Ooh, we have to weave this in somehow that, having a healthy diet is still important. It's just that there's a difference between doing that and trying to starve or kill the SIBO directly."
Okay.
Um, I think that the best way to explain it is to go back to what I said earlier, the idea of building a strong, resilient, healthy SIBO-proof body and
Mm,
strong, resilient, SIBO-proof microbiome. You need nutrition to do that. So do you have enough protein to make new building blocks and new tissues and new cells and make new, like, GI epithelial cells and make a new gut lining? Do you have enough fat to myelinate your nerve endings and do all of the things that fat could do for us? Do you have carbohydrates, which are still remarkably important for people despite keto and carnivore being so popular nowadays? I'm not saying in the quantity that a lot of Americans eat carbohydrates, just for the
mm,
record, and I'm not saying that sugar is important for us, but complex carbs do feed beneficial microbes like Faecalibacterium praesidentii and Bifidobacterium. And I've actually seen carbohydrates play an important role in things like thyroid hormone function and sex hormone
mhm,
functions and like cycling and sleep, but especially hormonal kind of implications in women. So, like, are you getting enough food? Are you getting enough of those 3 macros? Are
mhm.
you getting enough dietary fiber and a variety in that fiber so that you're feeding your microbiome and making your microbes healthy and resilient and diverse and strong? And then we could get into vitamins and minerals, but it's all about, like, do you have the building blocks to build a new, healthier version of you, which is ultimately what you're trying to do, I hope. And are you giving your microbiome the fuel that it needs to be healthy and strong and resilient?
Yes. Okay. So it's not directly killing the SIBO by, the diet that you choose, but it does contribute to overall health and that
Yeah.
building that SIBO proof body. Yeah. I love
Yeah.
that. And that's the other
And I
thing. It's like, it's not going to hurt anybody to make your diet healthier.
right, like, getting a little bit more riboflavin never hurt no one. Getting a little bit more folate and leafy greens never hurt no one. Like, let's just do those things, and we don't have to sweat these really harsh,
Yeah.
strict
And
regimens and, like.
then the only time that you would really want to implement anything like a carnivore diet or a low FODMAP diet or any kind of SIBO diet would just be to get symptoms under control as you're working towards, so it should be a really short term type thing. Because
Yes.
there's no argument that going on a carnivore diet can really affect people's symptoms and like
Yeah.
kind of almost miraculous. People that have had these horrible gut issues for years and can't get them under control, and then they go on the carnivore diet and it's like magic. So I totally get people, being like, well, this is how I'm supposed to eat.
It
But
well,
there's
it's
another way. There's another layer that we can add.
and can I actually say something that maybe some people won't appreciate, but I think that you're gonna get it?
Absolutely.
So, your audience, by and large, is gonna lean more keto carnivore-esque, right?
Yes,
So
although it is kinda shifting as I've been shifting,
okay.
there's turnover.
But I guess the flip side to that coin is that you probably don't have a ton of, like, vegans watching your channel, I would
Probably
imagine.
not. A few, but not a
Yeah,
lot. Yeah.
but not a large proportion.
Mhm.
Um, if you've talked to vegans or vegetarians enough times in your life, we've all heard stories of like, "Oh, I went vegan or I went vegetarian and I cut out meat and I felt so much better." Right? "Oh, my X, Y, and Z improved and I had better energy," and like we would look at that, like people who are in favor of eating enough fat and protein and meat. We
Mhm.
would look at that and say, "Nah, yeah, that's gonna be temporary. Yep, you'll see. You're gonna be B12 deficient in 3 months. You wait and see, man." That those silly gooses don't understand. But I
Mhm.
feel like it's the same thing sometimes. Like people will do something like carnivore or keto and they
Mhm.
will feel better in the moment for a few weeks or even a few months, and then they make this assumption of like, this is how all humans should eat. Just like the vegans are like, oh, I need to preach it to the world and I need to tell everybody to be vegan now. And
Yes.
they don't realize that there are drawbacks to eating that way in the long term.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I don't know if I've articulated this as well as I could have, but I guess my point is that even if a diet makes you feel superb in an acute time frame, that
Mhm.
doesn't necessarily mean that it's suitable for long-term use, and it's not even gonna say that that's, like, a perfect, amazing, healthy diet. It's just Band-Aids make the wound feel better when they are applied, but
Yes.
they're still Band-Aids, and I think, you take somebody who's on a standard American diet and you put them on a vegan diet, they're
Mhm.
gonna feel better because they're finally getting fiber, they're finally getting vitamin C and
Yeah.
folate and whatever, and vitamin E. They are more healthy because of that diet, but that's not the stopping point, like, and we could get those benefits from a more broad diet, and it doesn't have to be vegan. You could still choose to eat more plants and salads and do these things that a vegan would do while still consuming meat. And I think similarly over here, you can reap a lot of the benefits of going keto or going low carb by simply choosing to not eat as much white carbohydrates and sugar and junk. And you
Mhm.
can still get the nutrition that your body and your microbiome needs without having to go to that extreme.
Yeah.
But, as a temporary Band-Aid, it can make you feel stupendous. I acknowledge that. It's just that doesn't necessarily mean it's a long-term diet.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I wanna get back to keto 'cause I wanna talk more about that here in a minute, but I wanna get through, our list, our progression of, what we should do to treat SIBO. So, we talked
Mm,
about the breath test, we talked about the diet, we've kinda talked about the probiotics and fermented foods. Maybe we could
mm,
talk a little bit more about that, because when you start looking into SIBO, especially on YouTube, you'll hear different things. There's a large group that will say, no probiotics. You need to cut out probiotics.
yep,
They're just going to add to the problem. And then there's a growing group talking about the SIBO yogurt and like
mm,
the probiotic, like and adding a bunch of probiotics. So it's really, like two very different sides of the coin.
yep,
Can you shed some light onto like fermented foods and probiotics and what we should do with those while
yeah.
addressing SIBO?
Yeah, yeah. So first off, again, this is one that's really frustrating for me because what you hear in the SIBO rhetoric, in the SIBO Reddit threads and Facebook groups and some webinars and YouTube videos is incorrect. And I say that with confidence because there's a lot of evidence to support my stance on this, which is probiotics have been repeatedly shown in human clinical trials to either alleviate the symptoms of SIBO or actually help with eradication of SIBO when we use SIBO breath testing. So it boggles the mind that people are stuck. A lot of people are stuck in this like, you have too many bacteria and we want you down here and we need to subtract and not add. And there are famously Dr. Pimentel, who's a medical doctor out of Cedar Sinai, famous people, including him, will say with a straight face in a webinar or a YouTube video, you already have too many bacteria and you can't add bacteria on top of bacteria. That's just going to make the SIBO worse.
Mm.
And I'm like, bro, you're a researcher. You have PubMed. Like, I guarantee you have PubMed. This is a widely accessible thing. And you could look up probiotics and SIBO and do a search. And the only thing, can I put on my aluminum foil hat? Do I have it?
Yes.
No, I'll do this instead. Here, there's my
Okay.
tinfoil hat, okay? So, the only thing I could wrap my head around with him specifically is that this man is paid by the company that makes rifaximin.
Oh,
So,
tricky.
is there a conflict of interest there? Because again, the body of evidence we have is damning and very clear. Every single study I've ever read is wildly supportive of the use of probiotics in SIBO. And there are two meta analyses that look at that and say the same thing. Yep, the evidence says these are great. And then Pimentel and his cronies are saying, no, you can't do probiotics.
Hmm.
And so I just don't know what to make of that. If I'm trying to be courteous to him, the only thing I could think of is that he's heard people's stories where they said, "I tried a probiotic and it made me feel worse," and then that's why he's developed this stance. Again, this is a very forgiving stance. I think it's really the rifaximin conflict of interest thing. But I think that that goes back to, like, why some people get side effects when they take probiotics. And it might not be a quantity we're adding bacteria kind of thing. It might be that probiotics stimulate your immune system. And We
Oh,
don't know a lot about prescribing probiotics for the individual yet. It could be that you're taking a probiotic that stimulates your immune system in a way that is not favorable or enjoyable for you,
hmm.
and then you get more inflamed because of that. And it could have nothing to do with feeding the SIBO or adding to the SIBO.
Yeah.
But that all being said, um, I am a big fan of probiotics for SIBO and gut health just in general. The SIBO yogurt, I've had a lot of people give me positive feedback on that over the years.
Mhm.
Um, I think I've actually sent people your video specifically when
Oh,
they've asked,
nice.
like, how to make it. But yeah, it's the SIBO yogurt seems really great. I've had good luck with other probiotics for that matter. I
Yeah.
actually do something that I call speed dating with my students, where I baggie up like 2 capsules of 20 different products, and I label them a like the alphabet A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and it's a blinded study, and I just send them 2 days worth of a bunch of different probiotics, and I say, "Have at it. You let me know which ones you like."
See, that's awesome.
That's an interesting experience, I think, for both of us, but, you
Yeah.
know, when you do it that way, most probiotics seem like they do jack shit
Mm,
because 2 days is wildly unfair to judge a probiotic, I totally admit that,
yeah.
but usually people find a few, like 2 or 3 or 4 products where they're like, "Hey, my tummy was really flat the day that I took probiotic G," or,
Uh-huh.
"Hey, I just had the best poop of my life." Or occasionally people will say, "Hey, my histamine symptoms are a lot better these last couple days. I wonder if it's the probiotic." And
Yeah.
then, we explore it from there and we have them get a full bottle of the one that they seem to do well with.
Yeah,
Um,
and I mean, since I have videos about the, El Rodorai yogurt, I get a lot of comments from people about that specifically, and there are plenty of people that will, leave a comment saying, "This probiotic caused me diarrhea. This probiotic, gave me a
it's not for
histamine
everybody.
response." And, it's hard to know if it's just like your body needs time to adapt
Mhm.
or if it just isn't what your body is needing at the moment, and maybe a different probiotic would be the right choice. So I
Yeah,
really love that speed dating, the probiotic speed
yeah.
dating. And we will give info towards the end about how people can,
Mm,
get in touch with you and join your program and all of that good stuff
yeah.
where you can, be part of all that. Um, so um, do you ever use antimicrobials for
Ah.
SIBO? Because that's the next thing in the list of what we do. We cut out our probiotics and we start taking our antimicrobials. Is that something you ever need to do with your students?
Yes and no. So the way that I go about this work now with and I'll put a little asterisk in the statement that we're gonna loop back to in a minute, but I would say 98% of the time, I lead people through the process of building a SIBO-proof, resilient, healthy, strong body
Mhm.
first. Then, if we've spent 11 weeks focused on all of that, and you still, in your heart of hearts, feel like you need to kill something a little bit,
Mhm.
that the last module of my program, that is where we talk about the antimicrobials a bit.
Okay.
I'm gonna say I usually recommend lower doses than what you see on the SIBO internet
Mhm.
verse.
Mhm.
It's I don't do 5 tablets of oregano 3 times a day. I'll recommend like 1 tablet 2 or 3 times a day, and that usually gets the job done.
Okay.
But that's how I go about it most of the time. That being said, very, very rarely I will encounter somebody who is suffering so greatly and so acutely that we feel like we need to knock it back a notch right out the gate. So, as an example, this and again, like this is an example of if it looks like a duck, waddles like a duck, quacks like a duck, I'm going to call it a duck.
Mhm.
This woman worked with me. This was years ago now. And when I tell you she had every possible SIBO root cause under the sun, I'm not even joking because I have a questionnaire for it in my intake paperwork. She had had food poisoning numerous times, so severely, like she went to the ER numerous times.
Gosh.
Um, Celiac and Crohn's disease. And there does appear to be some tie-in with autoimmunity and the inflammation style of autoimmunity with SIBO, maybe. She was hypothyroid, and that's also very strongly linked with SIBO. She had been on proton pump inhibitor prescriptions at a high dose for numerous years. She had every symptom, she had every history thing possible, and it made sense. So I said, "Okay, look, this is the rare instance where I was the one who recommended low FODMAP, which almost never happens in this. Usually people come to me on the diet and then I'm the person who helps you get off of the restrictive diet.
Mhm.
But that was one of the rare instances where I was like, yo, like we need to just bring down your inflammation a couple of notches and help you feel human again. So she went on low FODMAP, got her started on a motility regulating agent called a prokinetic,
Yeah, I
and
was ask
I
about that.
did send her home with some antimicrobials. And this was one of those like miracle stories. She messaged me a couple weeks later and said she had lost like 15 pounds from, just like inflammation, water weight kind
Mhm,
of stuff. She was pooping every day, great. She felt a lot better. She was less inflamed. She felt like she could function again. And then after that, it was a game of, all right, now how do we reintroduce some FODMAP safely into your diet? Where's the balancing act with killing the microbes, but not being too harsh on your body?
mhm.
But that is a pretty rare case where I think somebody needs antimicrobials right out the gate like that.
Okay,
I would say the vast majority of people do just fine if they could be patient with the process
right.
of building the SIBO proof body first. And then the reward is that when you get to that conversation of antimicrobials, the vast majority of people find that they don't need antimicrobials by
Mm,
that point. And wouldn't that be nice?
yeah.
And then the 5 or 10% of people who decide that they need antimicrobials after all can get away with a much lower dose, and it's a longer lasting effect. You
Mm,
don't see this effect where I feel good on the antimicrobials, but then I try to get off of them and I feel like garbage again and I relapse, so I have to do more antimicrobials. You don't see that when you do it the way I'm describing.
okay.
1
Yeah,
round and you're done.
yeah. So my SIBO journey included antimicrobials because I knew Allison Seebecker personally once upon a time. We worked in the same health food store. I was a courtesy clerk and she was the wellness manager or something like that. Anyways, so as soon as I was like, I think I have SIBO, of course, I knew of her and I was like,
Mhm.
so I just went down the path of her protocol and it worked out, for me, in the long run. It's still I try to say this in my videos. I'm like, I don't know that that was the best. I mean, yeah, I can tell you where I am now, and I can tell you how I got there, but I'm not saying that anybody else should follow that exactly. But they did seem to be pretty effective for me. But I also do wonder if I had some other kind of a dysbiosis issue going on that wasn't specifically SIBO, and the antimicrobials really took care of that. So I mean, there's a lot of different paths you can take, and people can find healing in different ways. Like, for example, my sister, who is celiac, she also had really bad SIBO, and she did the rifaximin and
Mm.
she can eat anything she wants anymore. She can even, accidentally have a bite of gluten and it doesn't destroy her,
Okay.
like.
Yeah.
And so, like, there's a lot of different paths, but man, if you can go down the road of just building your body stronger, and not have to do the antimicrobials. Like, I wish I had known, I would have added all the probiotics and done the yogurt and, done all the lifestyle things. And it would have been
Yeah.
interesting to see how far I could have gone, and not had to do the whole antimicrobial thing. But I mean,
Yeah.
hindsight is 2020.
Yeah. And likewise, I wish I had known not to waste so much time and effort and money on leaky gut healer upper products and whatnot, but we're here and hopefully we can help people and shorten their journey.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so I wanted to touch real quick on prokinetics because you mentioned those, and that's another thing that we hear in the SIBO. Once you get in the SIBO world, you start hearing all about prokinetics. Can
Yes.
you give us a rundown of like what that is, why we would want some, and kind of how you use them?
Yes. Yes, this is one of my favorite topics for the record. So, okay, thinking of where to start. So, a prokinetic is a motility agent that regulates motility. So, importantly, it's not going to intrinsically speed you up like a laxative would,
Oh,
and it's not going to intrinsically slow you down like an antidiarrheal would. Right? Like, both of those things only move you in one direction. If you
hmm.
have constipation and you take a laxative, you will have more poops. If you have normal poops and you take a laxative, you will have more poops. If you have diarrhea and you take a laxative, oh boy, you're gonna have a lot of poops. And then the same kind of methodology works the other way for antidiarrheals, right? They're gonna slow you down and you're gonna have fewer poops. Um, With a prokinetic, it's gonna regulate motility, which is really neat because what I've seen is, at least with the herbal or the herbal prokinetics, sorry, is that the same prokinetic can be it for people with wildly different symptoms. So I've had in my Q&As, for example, I've had people come in and say, "Hooray, I found the prokinetic for me." One person used to have constipation, one person used to have diarrhea, and then it comes out in the Q&A that they both fell in love with the same prokinetic.
Wow.
It brought them back to center. It regulated. It wasn't stimulating or slowing down or speeding up. It's regulating. So classically with the herbs, you're going to see a lot of the blends have like artichoke and ginger. Sometimes you'll see other ingredients like 5-HTP, but um, a lot of them are very ginger and artichoke dominant. I sort of hypothesize that maybe prokinetics work primarily because of their action on bile. Bile is really, really important for motility and the migrating motor complex, which is a part of your motility that's mostly active in the small intestine, and that's what gets a lot of the claim to fame in the SIBO world, is that
Mhm.
we wanna stimulate or regulate that migrating motor complex specifically. And similarly, kinda with the probiotics, I gave up some years ago. I cannot figure out for the life of me which prokinetic an individual person will fall in love with, because again, it's not based on symptoms. One person with diarrhea, one person with constipation, they both fall in love with the same damn product. How am I supposed to make sense of that as a scientist? You can't.
Mhm.
So I gave up some years ago and said, "Screw it. Here's a week's supply of all of them. You tell me which one you like." And that's what I do. So I do that with all of my students and all of my patients. It's a labor of love to baggy up all of those damn
That
prokinetic pills,
that
but it's the only thing that I found that works with this in particular. But then what I try to do to kind of like help other people is that every couple of years I publish a video on my YouTube channel where I break down the stats of the highest percentage of people picked this product, the next highest percentage of people picked this product. And that way, the rationale is even if you don't ever work with me or take my program or get to do the speed dating yourself, if you were a betting woman or a betting man,
Mhm.
I would want to choose the fan favorite as my first go around. And
Yeah.
then if I was going to try another prokinetic, maybe you try the second favorite of the group and you can kind of work your way down the list that way.
Okay.
Um, but
Yeah.
anyway, so that's how I do that. But yeah, they regulate motility is
Yeah. Okay, and that's real important for, like, preventing SIBO relapse, just building that SIBO-proof body, just making sure that your motility it's moving.
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
it's like getting back to the root of what SIBO probably is at its core. And again, acknowledging the quantity of bacteria might not matter all that much. We already said that. But let's suppose that it does matter and it is a quantity game that we're after. If you think about what kind of environment might allow microbes to grow in an abundance, it's gonna be some sort of stagnation, right? It's like if you have a pond and the water is flowing through that pond and there's an entrance and an exit and you're constantly moving and clearing out that water, you're
Mhm.
not gonna get a lot of algae and lily pads and muckiness.
Mhm.
But if it's a pond with no inlet, no outlet, and it's just stagnant water, what happens to the pond? It gets really festery and slimy and filthy and icky and weird. And I
Mhm.
feel like that's what's kind of at play here with SIBO, and that's why things like proton pump inhibitor use and, food poisoning are such big root causes for SIBO in the first place, is that they cause stagnation. They alter motility or they alter the pH of the environment, and now you just get this petri dish blooming with bacteria and maybe yeast and maybe other stuff, and that's what it appears to be. So I'm of the opinion, I think that SIBO is a stagnation, dysmotility kind of issue at its core. And prokinetics are really getting at the heart of that and trying to promote the motility again.
Okay. This is kind of an aside that just made me think of with and I don't know if we wanna get too deep into this, but with the GLP-1 agonists that are,
Ah, mhm.
so popular, that when I first started hearing about them and about how they work and how they delay gastric emptying,
Yeah.
do you think we're gonna have, like, tons of SIBO
I
coming
wonder.
through?
I do
Yeah,
wonder.
yeah.
Um, it's maybe worth mentioning that gastric emptying versus the MMC versus, like, peristalsis in the colon, like, these are all different
Different.
flavors of motility.
Yeah.
So it's possible that maybe the GLP-1s are slowing gastric emptying, but they're not altering small bowel motility as much.
Okay.
Maybe that's an overly optimistic viewpoint that I have there.
Okay.
I actually that is something that I'm gonna cover on my channel probably in the next few
Okay.
months, is that I have a very long spreadsheet of things that I wanna research and put on that YouTube channel, and one of them is I would love to dive deeper into the GLP-1s and their slowing of stomach emptying and baby motility, but
Mhm.
also, are there ways that we can promote natural GLP-1 production in the gut with the microbiome or with our
Yes.
diet or with our lifestyle? And I'll give you a spoiler, yes, there is. It's just a matter of parsing out all the many ways that we could do that and how effective they might be.
Yeah.
Um, but
Okay.
yeah,
I'm
I
excited for
wanna
that. That'll
cover
be
that more.
fascinating. Yeah. Okay. So we've kind of touched on keto and carnivore in our talk so far, and it sounds like you're pretty anti-keto and anti-carnivore. Uh, so
Yeah, yeah.
um, I'm curious about your stance on like a ketosis type diet, a low carb diet, and if you would ever use it for people, or who you would use it for if you did.
Yeah. I think that there's a time and a place for almost everything. Even okay, so I just crapped on proton pump inhibitors, right? So let's say omeprazole or Protonix. There is absolutely a time and a place for those tools.
Mm,
Even though they're overused, and even though they cause a lot of SIBO and a lot of problems, there is absolutely a time and a place. My mom, bless her heart, she had an ulcer that was located over a major artery, and the ER doctors called it a geyser, and she almost bled to death in a day from
oh,
this insane ulcer. So when those doctors put her on a very high dose of omeprazole and told her, "This we have to squash down your stomach acid," I
mhm,
acknowledge that was a very, very good idea,
mhm,
right? But, run of the mill Joe Jane America goes into their primary care, says that they have heartburn, and there's no conversation of diet, lifestyle, sleep, blood sugar, nothing, and they're just given Protonix and then a wave and a bill out the door, right? Like, those are 2 wildly different scenarios.
mhm,
So, similarly, I think there's a time and a place for a lot of these diets, and I think that there's a continuum of how they can make you healthier. Kind of like how I said, if you take somebody on a standard American garbage diet and you have them do a vegan diet, they probably will get healthier doing that diet, at least in the short term. Like, there's plenty of stories to support that. But, I think that low carb and keto type diets and I'm gonna leave carnivore to the side for a quick second, but I think that low carb diets are probably most beneficial for metabolic syndrome,
yeah,
diabetes, weight loss, like that sort of world, as opposed to the gut health space.
mhm,
Um, and I think it's worth mentioning too that I think that there's a right way and a wrong way to do a lot of diets,
yeah,
or like a better way and a worse way of doing a lot of diets. I very rarely see people doing a version of keto that I think is good for the microbiome. Oftentimes, when I do see people who are doing keto, they're doing just gobs and gobs and gobs of dairy. They're doing tons and tons of saturated fat. They're doing, fat bombs left and right. And that probably is not as favorable for the microbiome as opposed to if you could do a relatively plant forward version of keto, kind of like how Mike Mutzel used to do years ago,
yeah,
where you're eating the greens and the salads and you're just not doing like the starchy carbohydrate or the starchy vegetables as
yeah,
much. Um, I think that that version of keto would be favorable for the microbiome, but I don't see people doing that. I see a lot of people doing kind of like the shortcutty ways of doing keto, where it's
yeah,
like bulletproof coffee and fat bombs and tons
yeah.
of cheese, and I
Yeah,
just
and with the, influence of carnivore, there's just this underlying assumption that plants are bad
yeah,
in all forms, and maybe you tolerate them better than other people, so you can have them just for entertainment's sake, but ultimately, they're not really contributing to your health, they're just for fun.
yeah,
And, I kind of lean towards that a little bit in my diet past, primarily because I ate them and they made me feel bad.
Yeah,
I'm really coming
but
out
you
of
were the problem, not the plants.
exactly.
Yeah,
You know
I
what?
say that with love. You're the
It's really
problem.
hard to admit that you are the problem.
Yeah,
So
what
I
is
get it. You
what
wanna, like, put all of the negativity on something outside of yourself,
yeah.
rather than taking responsibility for your own gut health.
Again, it's a very human quality, right?
Yeah,
But again,
yeah.
like and similarly, I'll go a step further. Gluten is not the problem. By and large, that's a whole conversation I'm getting into. We could talk about like GMOs and glyphosate and all of that crap, but by and large, gluten is not the problem. My inability to tolerate it
Huh.
is. There are plenty of people walking planet Earth who can eat gluten and not feel like garbage
I mean,
acutely.
apparently Jesus did.
Yeah, I mean, and there's this whole conversation of like similarly, okay, if you look at somebody who has an anaphylactic peanut allergy, are
Mm,
you gonna say that peanuts just universally across the board are bad for everybody?
yeah,
No. You acknowledge that it's that person's immune system and their inability to tolerate the peanut and the immune system erroneously saying that the peanut is dangerous that is
yeah,
the problem.
yeah.
It's not the
My
peanut
son
for
has an
gluten.
egg allergy, and so I love that one for the carnivore diet where I'm just like, "Well, he has an egg allergy, therefore eggs are not healthy for everyone."
Yeah, and again, like, when you have that experience as an individual, it makes sense how you could kinda get led down that path. And I admittedly, I was that person for a long time. I responded to gluten-free really well. Again, chronic low back pain of 5 years went away. I used to get headaches more often, like, some things cleared up for me.
Mhm.
So, I became the person who preached gluten-free to everybody. Not in my personal life so much, but, like, clinically, everybody and their brother had to go on a gluten-free diet. Oh, if you have any autoimmunity, any gut problem, you have to go gluten-free. That was part of the treatment plan in the beginning for me. And now I've come full circle and I realize, no, my inability to tolerate wheat does not make it intrinsically horrendous for everybody. And maybe there is some benefit either microbially or mental health wise to letting people go to Panera Bread every now and then and just eat a bagel like a normal person, you
Right.
know? Like,
Yeah, yeah,
and I
so a diverse diet, I'm coming around to the idea that that is a positive thing to have a wide array of foods that you eat. But I'm not a scientist. I can't, sit here and say exactly why. Why would it be better to have a diverse diet versus just picking 5 different foods that check all the boxes of all the nutrients, the protein, the fat,
Mhm.
the carbohydrates you need, and just eating those 5 foods day in and day out? Is there some extra benefit to eating a variety of things every day?
There is. So A, I would strongly question the notion that you could pick 5 foods and get all of your nutritional boxes checked.
Right.
I don't even know if that's possible with 10 or 20 foods. That's much harder than people realize it is. And if you do nutrition tracking enough, you'll kind of see that pattern. But unless you're eating liver pretty much every single day
Mhm.
and some sort of like folate rich leafy vegetable every day, and then some sort of like sunflower seeds, almonds for vitamin E, I could probably construct a really weird diet where you hit all the boxes with a minimal amount of foods. But I think couple fold. A, the diverser your diet is, the more likely that you're gonna get all of the macronutrients and micronutrients, vitamins and
Mhm.
minerals that you need to
Mhm.
build new tissues and build new building blocks. So there's that. From a microbiome perspective, the more diverse your diet is, the more diverse your microbiome is. And that is what we now understand makes the microbiome healthy and strong and resilient. You basically want to have a lot of redundancy in the system so that if you accidentally or intentionally pick off a few bacteria, like let's say bacteria that can make butyrate.
Mhm.
Butyrate is a really great anti-inflammatory molecule that you want more of, and it's good for the brain, it's good for the immune system, it's good for the gut, it's good for everything. Well, what if you only had one type of microbe that's capable of making butyrate? And then let's say you get an infection or have a surgery or get dental work done and you need to take an antibiotic. Now that antibiotic comes along and bink, takes out that one bacteria, you're hosed. You don't have anybody else left that can make butyrate. Versus if you have 20 different species that are capable of making butyrate, and now you pick one off, you're okay. You've got your bases covered. Other bacteria are still capable of doing that job. Um, so that's part of it, I think, is the redundancy and just having that protection and giving you that resiliency through redundancy in the
Mhm.
system. Also, there's a lot of crosstalk happening behind the scenes with what they call cross feeding, where it's less about, oh, I eat the broccoli and the broccoli feeds this one microbe, and then this one microbe you out this molecule. It's more of like, I eat the broccoli feeds this microbe, that microbe makes compound A. Compound A is then gobbled up by a different microbe, which then
Mm.
excretes compound B. Compound B is now metabolized by another microbe, and there's this whole big food web that goes
Mhm.
into it, and it's way more complicated than any of us can wrap our heads around right now, but it's I think that that's another thing is that we're building these food webs and we're building these food chains with diversity. Um, but more to the point, I will share, there was a really cool study maybe about 4 or 5 years ago. I think it came out in 2020. It was the American Gut Project, and they did, some nutrition assessment or food diary, and they had people send in stool tests, and they collected 10,000 of these samples,
Mhm.
pairs of data, and they were looking to see what is it that makes the microbiome healthy? Is it the people who self-describe themselves as vegan or vegetarian or keto or whatever? Or was there some other quality to the diet? And the thing that they found from 10,000 samples is that the more plant foods you eat in a given week, the better and stronger and healthier and more diverse your microbiome is.
Mm.
And they were actually able to assign a number to it. They said 30 or more plant foods per week had the best correlation with strong, healthy, resilient microbiomes. 10 or fewer had the least healthy microbiomes, and then everybody else was kind of in the middle. And so when I teach this to people, I always pick on my Uncle Paul because I kid you not, I have an uncle. The only vegetable the man ever eats is carrots.
Oh.
He will not eat anything else. I mean, he eats, like, spaghetti and pizza and garbage food all the time, but the only remotely healthy thing the man eats is carrots,
Wow.
and it's like a quest for all of us in the family to try to sneak fruits and vegetables in his diet whenever we can. So my other
Like dealing
uncle
with a child.
so, like, my other uncle made avocado chocolate pudding
Ah,
and fed it to him, and we were all like, "He, you're eating fiber for the first time ever." And then every year at Thanksgiving, I make what I jokingly call carrots and white carrots, AKA parsnips. And every year I make a big deal of it. I'm like, "Look, Uncle Paul, I got the white carrots just for you." And he's
oh,
just
how
like, "Oh, okay." Like,
funny.
he knows what I'm up to. He knows my shenanigans, but my point is you don't wanna be like my Uncle Paul. You want to eat a bunch of different stuff
Yeah.
all the time, and if you do that, you're gonna build a resilient, diverse microbiome, and that's actually what is associated with all sorts of positive health outcomes.
Yeah. So with my experience going from a very restricted diet to opening up my diet, one thing that I'm just so excited about is like I used to travel a lot when I was young before I got married. I went around the world and did all kinds of stuff. And I was like, I'm having kids now, and this isn't the season for that, but there'll be a day where I'll get to travel again.
Mm,
And as I was dealing with all of my health issues, I just kept thinking like, I'm not gonna I can't do that because I can't just go anywhere and eat anything.
yeah,
I have to have this very specific diet, and so I just kind of like, took that option off of the table for me.
trying to put your dreams on hold.
Exactly, where it was like, well, I can't just go, with my husband to Mexico. He was just in Mexico doing some, humanitarian work, and, like, I couldn't just pick up and go do that, because I can't eat the rice and the beans. I have to stay on my
Mm,
strict, almost carnivore diet. But as, I've worked through my gut health and gotten to a place where I can pretty much eat anything, at least for a short amount of time,
mm,
um, I could just pick up and go and eat rice and beans if
yeah.
I wanted to, and that freedom is just so incredibly valuable to me. So that's one of my huge motivations in,
Yeah.
working on this and not getting pigeonholed into this, "Nope, I have to be here. I have to have everything exactly right, or else life is over."
Yeah, well, you touched on something 2 things actually that I wanna bring up. A, your question a few minutes ago was, is there any benefit to a diverse diet versus having, like, this weirdly perfect 10 foods that hit all the bases?
Yeah.
And I brought up, there's the nutrition for you perspective, there's the nutrition for the microbiome perspective.
Mm,
There's a third thing that I failed to mention, but is also very important, which is how our food and the way we eat and the way we interact with food affects our mental health and our quality of life.
yes.
That is a really big important thing, and I feel like nobody's talking about it or hardly anybody's talking about it. And in the gut health space and in the functional kind of space, I think there's this like undertone of food is medicine
Mm,
and you wouldn't eat poison, would you? So why would you have that graham cracker? Oh my god, like, don't you care about your health at all, you lunatic, and, like, you have to eat all organic, gluten-free, dairy-free, soy-free,
yeah,
meat-free, plant-free, everything free. Just eat ice cubes, for crying out loud, just eat ice cubes.
as long as they're
And
filtered.
and frankly, I see a lot of disordered eating and a lot of, like, unhealthy levels of orthorexia in the functional integrative space. Um, and I think that a lot of times practitioners and influencers imprint that onto their patients or their followers.
Yes.
And people don't realize how bad their relationship is with food until they start examining it and kind of thinking like, "Oh, well, how do normal people eat?" And I'm
Mm,
not saying that you get like a donut the size of your face every morning for breakfast, just for the record, but like, is there some happy medium where you're eating mostly healthfully and you're treating your body like a temple and all of that shit, but you also occasionally get to eat a brownie?
yeah,
I think that there is. That's how I live my life.
yeah,
80-90% of the time, I eat my veggies, my protein, my Greek yogurt, my whatever, and
mhm,
then 10% of the time, I eat what I want, ice
yeah,
cream or whatever it might be, and I eat sugar, and I'm living to tell the tale, and I think I'm perfectly healthy, so
yeah. I kinda came to that realization, slowly like we do, but it was, after my very strict, like, Whole30 paleo
mm,
phase, which I know you know a lot about. um, I realized that every birthday of my kids, I wouldn't eat the dessert.
mm,
They would all sit
yep,
there and eat this dessert, and I wouldn't, and I just thought, I don't want my kids to remember that.
yeah,
That's like, just really recognizing how important food is for us mentally, emotionally, spiritually,
culturally,
socially,
yeah,
community, like, it's more than fuel, and you said, in the functional world, food is medicine. In
mhm,
the diet world that I, kind of, live in, it's food is fuel, and if
mhm,
you take pleasure from food, you're an addict. That's
yeah,
that's the thing
you're
that's
a
really
monster,
like, if you have any kind of a craving or, something that it would be really hard for you to give up, it means you're addicted to it and you need
yeah,
to break that addiction. And I pretty much reject that. Not that, people don't have processed food addictions and, things that maybe you could classify as that. But when it comes to enjoying food, like, I just think it is fundamental to us as humans, and we see it with newborn babies where, like, they're loving their food, and it's comfort, and it's love, and it's
yeah,
talk about the ultimate comfort food. But, we could just call those little babies addicts.
yeah, yeah,
You just need to break
damn
your
addict.
addiction.
Well, and here's something too that I wanna weave in here, something that we actually haven't touched on, which is important for SIBO, which is the idea of vagal tone.
Mm,
So, I think you understand already, but I'm gonna say it just for the
yeah,
audience.
for sure.
So, there's this whole cool world of the gut-brain axis, the gut-brain connection, and the brain is constantly telling the gut what to do, like, "Hey, make stomach acid right now, make enzymes, do motility, go poop," whatever.
Mhm.
Um, the big super highway that connects those 2 is the vagus nerve, and it's this the the autonomic side of your nervous system. Sorry, I'm trying to, like, not get too nerdy, but nerdy enough that it makes sense.
Yeah.
There's part of your nervous system you are in conscious control of. So right now, I'm choosing to touch my finger to my nose. Right now, I'm choosing to speak these words to you. I'm choosing to blink my eyes, whatever it might be. But there are functions in my body that my nervous system is controlling that I am not under conscious control of. So,
Mm,
for example, I cannot tell my heart to beat exactly at 62 beats per minute. We don't get to decide that stuff. It
mhm,
happens automatically. So the automatic or the autonomic side of your nervous system that's just kind of on autopilot, doing things behind the scenes, controlling things like breathing and heart rate and motility and stomach acid secretion and insulin secretion and all of these cool functions that we don't have to think of. There are two sides. There's the rest and digest side, which is largely tied to the vagus nerve, which we're going to talk about in a second. And then the opposite side of that coin is called fight or flight, or more recently I've heard it called fight, flight, freeze, appease. And
hmm,
it's the fear-driven side. It's the survival side of your nervous system. So if you hear a loud noise, if you hear a loud bang outside your door, you will automatically increase your heart rate, increase your blood pressure, you'll jump, you'll look, your pupils will change. Like there's all of these things that happen automatically without your conscious control as a survival instinct. And similarly, your body is deciding when you're safe enough to digest your food. And it's
mm,
deciding that every moment of the day. Well, a lot of us live our lives chronically stuck in that fight or flight mode. And we're scarfing a granola bar on the way to the next meeting, or maybe not your people, maybe not a granola bar. You're scarfing a steak on the way to your next meeting. I
there
don't know
you
what you people do.
there you
Like
go.
you're eating on your way to the next meeting. You're dealing
Yeah,
with rush hour traffic and a miserable commute. You're fighting with your spouse. You're fighting with your husband. You're paying bills. You're doing whatever. And our vagus nerve, this rest and digest side of our nervous system, doesn't get to kick in all that often. And then
mhm,
we wonder why we're not digesting our food. But it's like you're not turning on the rest and digest side of your nervous system. But weaving this back to the point is that having a connection with our food and actually enjoying the food we put in our mouth and enjoying the experience and the connectedness around food is part of what tones your vagus nerve.
oh, wow.
So if you eat your meal and if you hate that food and you just would kill somebody to eat a damn bagel and you're gritting your teeth through yet another salad that just sucks so bad and you can't take it anymore. Or if you're terrified of food, which I see a lot in the SIBO community, you
Mm,
eat something and you're just terrified that it's gonna make you bloated or distended or have diarrhea or have tummy pain or whatever it might be. The way we're eating our meals is not conducive for this rest and digest state. But if we can find ways to feel at peace with our nutrition again and actually enjoy the food that we're putting in our mouth and connect with the people and the community and the culture of our food and
mhm,
like make that recipe that you remember from your childhood, make that cookie recipe that was your nana's specialty, eat a piece of cake at your best friend's wedding or at your child's birthday party and just reconnect with life in that way. I think that goes a really long way in facilitating better vagal tone, which is going to pay you back in dividends, but that is oftentimes lost in the SIBO community.
yeah. Oh, I love that so much. So it's so incredibly important to, like, bring all of these pieces together. Um, I have we're getting close to 2 hours here. We've just got I feel like we've covered
I
so much good stuff. I love the conversation that we've had, and I wanna get there was just a few questions in the chat. If anyone does have questions
yeah.
that's watching, feel free to put them in, and we could kinda do a rapid fire type thing. I did wanna ask though, just real quick, how do you eat? Like, how does the gut
Ooh.
microbiome queen eat in a day?
Oh,
Examples.
that's a fun question. I did not see that one coming. How fun. Okay, so I guess how do you want me to frame this answer? Are you curious about like anything I'm working on at the moment or like macro
Just
breakdown or
I'm
like
fascinated
examples of what I would eat in a day?
yeah, examples. I
Well,
think examples of what you'd eat in a day. I watch, what I eat in a day videos on YouTube. I find it fascinating to watch what people put together and what people enjoy, and just,
yeah.
how do you feed your microbiome and feed your
Yeah.
soul
Yeah.
through your diet?
Exactly, case in point, the vagal tone
Yeah.
thing. Yeah, okay, so I'm just gonna go, like, meal by meal through the day and give examples then. Um, I will say, though, as somebody who's done a lot of nutrition tracking on myself over the years, um, I usually get, like, 100-ish grams of protein. It's kind of a work in progress for me, protein, because, like I said, I'm a recovering vegetarian, and I think that I still have that deep in the recesses of my brain to this day. 15 years later, I've eaten meat for 15 years now, and it's still back there.
Mhm.
So kind of making more of a conscious effort with protein personally. And then carbs, I'm usually somewhere between like 150 and 200 grams of carbs, depending on the day. Fiber, I usually hit on the money, or I go a little bit over the RDA, which for women is 25 grams of fiber per day.
Mhm.
But what that looks like, so again, acknowledging I'm trying to make more of a conscious effort for protein these days. Breakfast, a lot of times I'll do 3 eggs and maybe like 50 or 60 grams of cottage cheese,
Nice.
which I never thought in my wildest dreams I would eat. I've always been repulsed by cottage cheese. It's
Huh,
all like
love cottage.
lumpy and curdly looking. But I saw online somebody said, "Oh, you can mix it in with cheese and you don't even notice it, and there's some more protein for you." And it
Uh,
is damn good. So
I
I've been mixing 3 eggs, spoonful of cottage cheese, kind of mixing that up, cooking that in a frying pan. Sometimes I'll do like onions, garlic, bell peppers, slices, something in it to jazz it up a little bit. And then my mom found a company that makes gluten-free bagels, and they'll ship them to you out of New York City, and they're actually kind of good. So
Oh,
I've been enjoying that on half of a sesame seed bagel, and it's been kind of delightful. Um, Sometimes in the morning, especially in the winter, I like to make homemade chai lattes.
nice.
So I make my own concentrate and I put a bunch of like hippy dippy herbs and shit in it, like immune regulating boosting herbs like astragalus and codonopsis. But I jazz it up with cinnamon and ginger and all of the stuff. And I make it and freeze it into cubes. And then I just pull it out of the freezer as I need to. And then I mix it with like a little bit of almond milk or creamer or whatever
Make a
I'm
YouTube
feeling.
video on that.
Yeah, I should. It's
That'd be
actually really
awesome.
good. And
Yes,
then
great.
I'll usually sweeten it with a little bit of honey and a little bit of monk fruit, just so it's not terribly sugary, but it's not devoid of sugar either.
Mhm.
Um, but that's more of a winter thing because 'cause I'm always cold. So I like having a warm cup of something, and I'm not a coffee drinker personally.
Okay.
Um, I kind of wish I was, however, because the polyphenols in coffee are great for your microbiome.
Yes. Yeah, I
Ugh.
just reposted something from Sarah Ballantyne about all the nutrients in coffee, and I was just like,
Yeah.
"Yes,
Yeah, I know.
I needed this."
I I laugh and I shake my head. I tried to drink coffee for like a month. I thought, "Oh, I could get into this." No, it's
That's
warm dirt water to me. I don't see the appeal of the bean juice personally,
yeah,
but it's
my
okay.
husband's the
Each
same
their own.
way, but
Yeah.
I'll drink the
My
coffee,
husband loves
it's
coffee.
fine.
But yeah, so that's a typical breakfast. I've been playing very recently with like blended overnight oats
Uh-huh.
where you kind of blend up the oats so it's not that same kind of
Oh,
texture.
yeah.
Um, and then I'm putting like some vanilla whey protein powder in it, some ground up chia seeds, almond milk or something, a blob of Greek yogurt. Again, trying to emphasize protein, but I've been doing that lately and then putting like strawberries or something on top of it in the morning. And that's been really nice.
That sounds good.
Um, but otherwise, I've been on an egg kick for breakfast. Occasionally, like this morning, we did what we affectionately call peanut butter toast cereal. This People are going to come for me with pitchforks when I say this one. Okay, so my daughter used to be addicted to peanut butter toast, and
Okay.
then at some point years ago, when she was little, my husband made this thing and called it peanut butter toast cereal, and it was a total marketing ploy to get her to try
Uh-huh,
it,
uh-huh.
and it
Whatever.
worked. So what you do, you get natural peanut butter. We are a Trader Joe's peanut butter household. My daughter refuses to eat any other peanut butter, and it cracks us up. Big blob of natural peanut butter, and you mix it with plain Cheerios, and it kind of coats each individual Cheerio and prevents it from getting soggy in the milk. And
Okay.
then if you wanna up the ante, we make chocolate milk for her, AKA I add a little bit of cocoa powder to plain ass almond milk or regular milk, and
Yeah.
then she thinks it's chocolate milk, and she's like, "Yay." But we'll do that, and that's scrumptious. Sometimes I'll slice up a banana in that. But, yeah,
Oh,
so I did peanut butter toast cereal this morning, and it was delightful.
mm,
Um, Lunch? It sort of depends. I work from home, so, it sort of depends on the day, but I'll usually do, like, something in the oven, and I'll just throw it in and then go back to work for 20 or so minutes and then go down and eat it. I'll do a lot of, like, some sort of fish, like, Costco has these totally not low carb, but they have everything crusted cod fillets in the
Oh,
frozen
that sounds
section.
good.
Delish. So I'll put, like, 2 of those in the oven and maybe some roasted veggies or something. Occasionally, I'll do, like, hummus and veggies and just have a giant plate of that for lunch. But again, I'm trying to do protein more distinctly. Sometimes I'll do a wrap with turkey or something like that, but, oh, another one I really like is chickpea pasta.
Oh, yeah.
So, extra protein, extra fiber there
Yep.
with pesto, and then I get frozen mussels,
Oh my god.
like mussels,
Huh?
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Bivalve. You could I get them at, the crappy old Kroger or whatever down the street. You get a bag of, like, 8 ounces of pre-shucked, pre-prepared mussels, and I just microwave them for, like, a minute, and then bada bing, bada boom, extra
Wow.
protein, B12, zinc, iron, all of the things, and it goes well in the pesto pasta.
That sounds
So that's what I'll do some variation like that for lunch, and then dinner, my husband usually cooks dinner for us, and we have a couple of go-tos on rotation, but kind of our default is, like, a salad, some sort of veggie like asparagus, broccoli, cabbage. We're big on the cruciferous veggies in this household.
mhm.
And then we'll have some sort of meat, whether it's chicken or pork or steak or whatever. Um, and then some sort of carb. By the way, I wore a special wardrobe for you today, and I
Oh,
want acknowledgement of this.
okay, okay.
Because your channel is gonna be a little bit more low carb leaning, I decided to be a pistol and wear this, less haters, more taters.
I
Very
love it. I
yeah.
love
I
it.
chuckled when I picked this one out.
I mean, that's what, need on my channel.
That's right, you need less haters, more taters.
Yeah,
But,
I'm definitely getting the more taters part. We're working
yeah,
on the less haters part.
yeah, like, pretty nutritious too, humble
Yeah,
old potato.
I think
But,
so.
yeah, we'll do, like, potato or rice or whatever. But sometimes we'll do a burger, sometimes we'll do my husband recently mastered, butter chicken.
Oh, yeah, delicious.
So, we'll do butter chicken sometimes. My daughter's also a sucker for a good taco. So, we'll get, again, like, the little corn tortillas and do,
Mhm.
like, a build your own kinda taco night, maybe, like, once a week or every other week or something. So, we have a couple of go-tos on rotation.
Nice.
Sometimes it's soup, something boring, but, yeah,
Yeah.
that's kind of a rundown. And I've confessed I'm not a coffee drinker, but I am a sucker for another food that has polyphenols in it, and that is chocolate.
Oh,
You
good.
could call me an addict. I do not care because it's probably true. You will take chocolate from my cold, dead fingers and not a moment sooner. I
Yeah.
love it so, so much, but I usually have some variation of chocolate, like chocolate covered almonds or dark chocolate or whatever it might be. Um, I will confess, however, we're coming up on Easter, right?
Mhm.
So I could not eat dairy, or I didn't eat dairy for about 10 years. And then I reintroduced it a few years ago, and now I could eat dairy with abandon. It's totally fine.
Nice.
One of the things I was delighted to bring back, and it's so stupid, is those stupid little Cadbury eggs that are like not the cream eggs, those are
The
gross.
candy shell ones?
Yes, the candy shell, and they're sugary AF,
Mm.
and you can smell them, like, the smell is so pungent,
Oh, I
it
know
permeates the
exactly how they taste
plastic
and
bag.
smell. Yeah.
I love those so much, and I can't explain why, but I remember them fondly from my childhood, and I remember for many years, I would walk by them in Target or Walmart or something, and I would smell them, and I'd be like, "Oh, if only." And now that I can eat dairy again, I will confess that I got some of those, and they're so good.
Oh my
Uh,
gosh.
and I've been eating a little bit of those, but my compromise is we went to a Ghirardelli store a while back when we were on vacation.
Huh?
We picked out a bunch of different kinds, and I was a knucklehead, and I picked out, like, 92% dark chocolate squares.
Mm-mm.
That's intense even for me. I like a good 85%, but 90 something percent was too much for me. So what I've started doing this week is I'm like, "Well, I could use up these stupid squares of awful chocolate." So I break it, I'm not even joking. I break the Ghirardelli
I
square
would
into
totally do the same thing.
quarters, and I put 1 sugary Cadbury egg and 1
It's called
quart
balance.
Yeah, and 1/4 of the horrible Ghirardelli stuff, and I pop them both in my mouth at once, and I chew them together, and then it evens out to something that's utterly delightful,
That's
and
amazing.
dare I say health promoting because there's surely more polyphenols in that horrible Ghirardelli stuff,
Right.
but
Yeah.
yes, it's
We went to Trader Joe's recently, and they had it was like a box of, candy chocolate eggs, very similar to the Cadbury ones, but they were,
okay.
like, different flavors. So there was a coffee flavor and a hazelnut flavor and a
Oh,
couple other ones. Those were mighty tasty because they
I bet
had
you
that crunch of the candy
yeah,
shell, and the candy shell was real thick. I don't know if you like
yeah,
that kinda thing.
that could be good. I mean, I would probably give the coffee ones to my husband, but I could
Sure,
get
yeah.
behind some of the others.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
All right.
And
I love
that's
that. Your diet sounds delicious and actually very similar to the way that I am eating right now, and I love it. Like, I still am just, like, over the moon with how delicious the food is that I'm eating and how good I feel eating
yeah,
it. It's just like, I have dreamed of this for years, and, like, all of a sudden, it's like the heavens opened up and the angels are singing. It's
yeah.
like, oh, man, where
There's
is
a
my
there's
life?
a GIF that I love of Winnie the Pooh, and he's seated in front of probably honey, it might have been cake or something, but it's a GIF of Winnie the Pooh, and he's going like this, and he's doing, like, this cute little happy dance with his eyes closed before he eats whatever the thing is,
Uh-huh.
and I tell my students, "That's what you wanna do." Like, that's you want that kind of a relationship with your food,
Yes, I
right?
spent way too many years just being like, "Huh, I don't wanna eat this."
Well, and briefly, I'll share this too. I think part of it is the actual food that you put in your body, but, I had a student once, um, I generally encourage people to chew their food thoroughly.
Mhm,
That's you don't have to count or do anything weird like that, but just chew a little bit more. We in America especially, we are again, we're running to the next meeting, we're driving down the road, scarfing a granola bar or steak or whatever it is, and we could benefit from slowing down and being aware of what we're experiencing a little bit more. And I remember in this particular part of my program, one of my students came on the Q&A, this was years ago, and she said, well, I've been doing this all along and I still don't feel better. And she said, and I quote, I chew every bite of food until it's a bland, flavorless paste.
fun.
I was like, oh, okay. You have the opposite problem. I was like, okay, listen up. And this was a group of maybe like 8 or 10 people on the call. And I'm like, okay, listen, literally everybody else, your job is to go forth and chew your food more. You, Kay, I remember her name. Kay, your job is to chew your food less. Yeah,
Context
like,
matters.
you're not gonna enjoy your food if you chew it to a disgusting flavorless paste.
Yeah, no
That's
fun.
defeating the whole purpose of what you're trying to accomplish here. Your vagus nerve is so pissed that you're doing that, and your vagus nerve is like, "Ew, I don't like any of this food, that's gross." And so you're not gonna digest it worth a damn. But yes, I remember bland, flavorless paste, those words will haunt me until the end of days.
This sounds so fun.
Yeah, just enjoy your food, people.
Okay, let's get into some questions here. This one is from Taylor. When should you take a prokinetic? First thing in the morning on an empty stomach or before bed?
Ooh, that's a good question. So, if it's a prescription, I would follow whatever the bottle says or whatever your prescriber says. I'm not a prescriber, so I can't really comment on that. For the herbal ones, when I have people try them, I do recommend taking them on an empty stomach. So, usually that means mid-afternoon, like halfway between lunch and dinner for the first dose, and then sometime between dinner and bedtime for the second dose.
Okay.
That being said, that's not always doable for every person, and sometimes I will work with people who are, like, teachers, or I remember I worked with a guy once who was an anesthesiologist, and I can't tell that person with a straight face, "Okay, you need to check yourself out of the operating room. When your little dorky alarm goes off that it's time to take your prokinetic, you have to excuse yourself from the surgery room, and you need to go take your motility activator." Like,
Mhm.
no. Some people just legitimately can't pull that off. I personally hate taking pills on an empty stomach. I don't know if I have a stricture or something, but they tend to get lodged, and it just annoys the crap out of me.
Okay.
So I've had a lot of people experiment with taking the pills with meals or taking them at different times a day. I've had some people take one at breakfast and dinner, lunch and dinner, dinner and bedtime. I've had some people just take a double dose of whatever it is at bedtime. they seem to work regardless. It might be a matter of like 100% efficacy versus 90 or 95% or
Okay.
something, but they seem to work reasonably well whenever you take them.
Okay.
But in
Awesome.
theory, empty stomach twice a day.
Okay. Um, we kinda touched on this already. She has IMO, which
Mm,
is I forget.
emo.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
intestinal methane overgrowth.
okay, okay, yeah, the methane.
Yeah.
Is, the SIBO yogurt, like the L-Reuteri, that would probably be, something good to try at least.
Yeah, I think so. Remind me, uh, refresh my memory on the SIBO yogurt. It's the BioGaia Gastrus is one of the ones that's used, right? Is it that
It's
variation of L-Reuteri or a different
yes,
one?
well, Doctor Davis has come out with his own, Reuterized supplement
Okay.
now, so, of course, that's what's,
Okay.
recommended, and then so it has the Reuteri, the,
Yeah.
Gastri, and the coagulants.
Okay. Yeah.
Those are the 3.
Um, so the reason I ask that is that the 2 strains of bacteria in BioGaia Gastrus, that particular L. reuteri, uh, or those 2 strains, actually have some evidence for treating constipation in human clinical trials, and they've been shown to decrease methane in human clinical trials, that particular product. It could be that other strains of L. reuteri would do the same. I'm
Mhm.
not actually sure, but I think probably a high likelihood that that would be beneficial for you. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely worth a try. Okay, from Daryl, currently adhering to a keto super gut diet, have lost 40 pounds. That is awesome. How do you transition from this diet to one that is not so restricted? Some
Hmm.
some quick tips.
Yeah, and I don't know if you have tips too as somebody who's done the transition more recently. Um, so I'll give you some examples from stuff that I see a little bit more. So a lot of my folks come to me on some variation of a SIBO diet. So whether that be low FODMAP or the low FODMAP SCD kind of hybrid diet, or some variation thereof. So, oftentimes, when we're diversifying the diet, I will have people start out with low FODMAP foods that they are currently not eating. And that's sort of the first step. So, and I have a little PDF list that I give students. So we could look at the list and say, hey, like, when's the last time you ate a carrot or a cucumber? Oh, it's been a while. All right, go to the store and get a carrot or a cucumber.
Mhm.
Then, when you look at the FODMAP list, you could break it down. It's an acronym. So there's the oligosaccharides, the monosaccharides, the polyols, et cetera. So you could look at the columns and you could kind of think for a track record. Oh, even before I did the SIBO diet, I remember I tolerated cauliflower totally fine.
Mm,
Or, oh, I've always been totally fine with mushrooms. Okay, well, maybe that column is the first one that you bring in then when you're reintroducing the high FODMAP foods, and then we kind of work our way through. I had a student on the Q&As, I think it was week before last, and he was saying that he does really well with apples. I was like, "Okay." So apples have some polyol content in them, the P in the FODMAP acronym, and they also have some fructose, which is the monosaccharide column of the FODMAP acronym. So chances are you would do just fine with the other high fructose foods and the other high polyol foods. So maybe try those foods first before moving on to the next couple of columns. Um, with keto, and I'm not really familiar with Supergut. I think that's based on a book. I don't remember the author's
yeah,
name.
that's Doctor Davis's book, and I'm
Oh,
also not familiar. I all I know is it's, grain-free.
okay.
Yeah, because he's the
Um,
Valley guy.
yeah, so since I'm not familiar with that particular blend of diet, I think the best thing I could tell you is again, if there's something that would still fit in the confines of the diet that you're just currently not eating, that could be a good starting point, similar to what I described. Um, or if you're looking at the no foods or the naughty foods, do you have any recollection of, "Oh, I actually used to feel fine when I ate that particular food?"
Mhm. Yeah.
And I've had that conversation with people where they're like, "Oh, I always knew I did fine with broccoli, but my practitioner made me go super strict and cut out the broccoli anyway." And I'm like, "Okay, bring that in first." Or
Mhm.
like, "Oh, I've always done fine with oats. Never had a problem once with oats." Okay, that's the first thing to come back then.
Yeah. Yeah, my only recommendation is to do it slowly.
Yeah.
Jumping into all of them all at once is gonna be pretty rough because it does take your body time to, rebuild the gut microbiome and be able to handle things. And then also one thing that I see often with people on a keto or carnivore diet is they've been on that diet for a long time, they try to add something back and they don't feel good. And then they say, "Oh, well, that must mean that my body can't handle that
Mhm.
food." And it may be that, but it also could be your body just needs some time to adjust. So starting really
Yeah.
slow and building up really slowly is probably a good choice. And then you can kind of have a better idea. Because there was a time where add back peanut butter and I would have terrible digestive issues.
Mhm.
Now I can eat it however much I want and it seemed to be fine. So it's like it really has to do with where your body's at for a lot of them. So just don't jump to any conclusions necessarily from the first go around.
That's a really good point to make actually too, is to go slow, but also don't judge it on the first interaction.
Yeah.
Um, it I see that pretty commonly, and honestly, if you think back and again, I'm gonna say something acknowledging I'm not a keto expert, but everybody talks about when you first go keto, you get the keto flu, right? And you feel like absolute garbage
Oh,
doing
yeah.
that.
Yeah.
But very few people in that community are gonna say, "Oh, that means the keto diet is bad." Everybody kind of understands that, "Oh, this is my body and my metabolism and maybe my microbiome adjusting,
I love
and I
that.
need to give myself the space to have that adjustment period." And I would say give yourself the same benefit of the doubt when you're introducing some of these foods back in. It might just take a hot minute for your metabolism and your microbiome and your body to figure out what to do with these foods again.
Yeah, yeah. I was just mentioning that on a video the other day where, people say it takes an adjustment to get into ketosis or whatever, and to, get to fat burning or whatever people are trying to get
Mhm.
to. And I said, it definitely also takes an adjustment to get out of that and to add carbs back in. And so it's not like an overnight thing where you just go from keto to 200 grams of
Yeah,
carbs and everything's perfectly fine. It's
yeah.
definitely an adjustment.
Well, and it could be a tad hypocritical at times too.
Mm.
Again, like, you're willing to feel like crap and not demonize the diet on the way down into ketosis, but then coming back out the other side, it's carbs are evil, carbs are bad. It's like, I don't know, that feels hypocritical to me
Yeah.
personally.
Yeah, let's just have a little bit broader of a perspective
Mhm.
here. Okay, so we kind of talked about this with the probiotics and
Mm.
stuff. Are fermented veggies okay with SIBO issues?
So I would always default to how do you feel when you eat them? First of all. I will say the idea of you already have too many bacteria and you're going to add more bacteria on top of that does seem to be erroneous. So I wouldn't go off of that. But as I mentioned earlier, probiotics do stimulate the immune system. So if you try a couple of different variations of fermented foods, or if you try a couple of different times to eat a fermented food and you just feel like crap doing it, maybe lay off of it for now and revisit it a few months later when maybe you built up more tolerance.
Mhm.
Because again, I think these things do stimulate our immune system, and we don't really have a good understanding of how to gauge that in people. Um, some people have histamine issues with SIBO, and fermented foods can elicit more of a histamine response for folks. So I would just default to how do you feel when you consume them? If you feel okay or good or neutral, I would keep eating them.
Yeah,
If you feel like crap, then maybe just give yourself a break from them for a month or two, work on some other stuff, and then try to reintroduce them down the road.
yeah, awesome. Not really a question, but Weave says SIBO treatments have left me so confused and skinny with a weird alien belly. That is a rough place to
Mm,
be. I'm very sorry. And we are going to talk about, how you can get in touch with Dr. Nikki and, see her program options and things like that. So definitely check that out. Yeah, because it's so hard to be in that place where you have done all of these things that are supposed to fix you and they leave you in a place of
a
unhealth.
deeper hole.
And the money that you spend, the time that you spend, the hope that you put in to all of these things, it's a rough place to be. So definitely have
Yeah.
a lot of compassion for that. Okay, let's see. I think that is here's one. This is, I think, more for me. Could you please tell your story of going carnivore to normal eating? I am dealing with IMO carnivore, and higher fat is starting to fail me after 2 months and 3 rounds of rifaximin prior. Yeah, that is rough. I did a video recently called, I think it's called All the Things I Did to Address My Gut Health or something like that. And I just went into my whole story. And so I definitely recommend checking that out because it is a long story. I always say it sure would be nice if we had these real simple, cut and dry. This was the problem. I found the answer. This was the result. but that's never, I mean, it's very rare that that's as simple as it is. So definitely
Human
recommend,
life is messy.
yeah, definitely recommend checking out that video for more of my story. Teresa is also a tea drinker. Excellent. Yeah. So you said you didn't drink coffee, and I was just like, oh no, I don't know if we can be friends. But then you said, you'd eat a lot of chocolate. And so I was like, okay, it's fine.
Yeah.
It's fine. At least we have that.
I love the smell of coffee if it's any consolation. I grew up with a mother who's very addicted to coffee, so I grew up with that smell in the house every single day, and now my husband is a coffee drinker, so I love the smell. I'll
Okay.
hang out with you
All
at a
right.
Starbucks
All
any
right.
day of the week. It's just I'm gonna get tea instead.
Yeah, you can get your chai latte.
Yep.
Okay. So real quick, yes, this video will be available for replay for sure. Um, okay. So here's a question for you. It seems like you
I
eat
just
a
saw that one.
standard American diet. Does your SIBO reoccur?
So first of all, I don't think I eat a standard American diet for one. It's sort of funny, like we get so sucked into hanging out in the health space that we forget what is actually typical in this country.
Oh my gosh,
Um,
just walking to Walmart.
well, or even like I'll say this. I love my husband's side of the family very, very much. I'm going to start by saying that. But also, they're not a health conscious group of people, generally speaking. And when we go to Buffalo, New York, and visit them for a few weeks in the summer, it is bizarre. They're drinking real soda, like real soda with sugar, like a Coke, a regular ass Coke. They are eating donuts the size of your face. I kid you not. It's this
Wow.
big. They'll go to Paula's Donuts. Shout out to Paula. And they'll get a dozen of these monster donuts and then they'll just eat that for breakfast. And that's a normal thing that they do. They'll get pizza and chicken wings for dinner. And I partake. I get the gluten free crust and I partake to some degree, but I do have a damn vegetable with the pizza. Okay. But my point is, a standard American diet is devoid of fiber, which mine is not.
Mhm.
I nail fiber every single day, sometimes going a bit over, but I definitely get enough dietary fiber on a day-to-day basis. Um, the standard American diet is also very high in simple white carbohydrates, which my diet generally is not. Now, when I go visit Buffalo, I will confess we're eating a little bit more ice cream or a little bit more pizza or whatever than we normally would at home, but that's life, that's flexibility. I think that's the goal here. But on a day-to-day basis, I would not say that my diet has an excess of starchy, simple white carbohydrates, nor would I say that I have an excess of saturated fat, which is typically the other thing that the standard American diet is described as. So
Sure.
I don't follow a standard American diet, but to the point that I think they were trying to make, I feel great. I have good energy. I have good mental clarity. I don't have any tummy problems. I don't experience any sort of bloating or diarrhea. I feel fine and my gut health is fine. So I think the important answer to what you wanted to know is how my gut is functioning and it's good. So
Yeah.
what I'm doing is working for me.
Yeah, I've had this, similar comment on some of my videos saying that now that I am not doing keto anymore, I'm just back on the standard American diet, and it made me think, I was like, "Now, is the standard American diet only defined as a macro breakdown?" And because I think that's in the low carb keto world, it's like, well, carbs are the bad thing.
Yeah.
We want the fat and protein, that's the good thing. So as soon as you add in carbs, blanket statement,
Yeah.
it's the standard American diet or this, some macro breakdown. And I personally don't believe that. I think
Well, yeah,
what's standard in America is, ultra processed foods and,
yes.
I just, I don't eat like that.
Well, and this is something that it's a term that's used in research, which means that it is standardized to a certain degree. And
Right.
like they can mimic a standard American diet in a mouse model, for example, or they can put people on a standard American diet. And again, when they do it in research, it's devoid of fiber, high in fat, particularly saturated fat and trans fat, high in simple white, heavily processed carbohydrates and sugar. Um, that's the typical definition of standard American. And I will say too, like for somebody in a more keto, even carnivore leaning space, when I said that I typically get like 150 to 200 grams of carbs, that probably sounds like, holy shit, she eats nothing but bagels. This is wild, man. But that's actually a pretty moderate carbohydrate
Yeah. It
content
seems it
diet.
should
Like,
be considered low.
it's pretty easy to push 400 grams of carbs in a day if you're eating the way that I described Family in Buffalo, for example,
Was
and
that
eating, like, big honkin' donuts, pizza and pasta,
yeah,
lots of white rice, lots of, like, bread and stuff like that. So, it's my diet's actually pretty moderate in carbs.
absolutely, I think so. It just I think it just comes from the demonization of all carbohydrates as just,
Yeah.
poison.
Well, and if I may say briefly before we do the next one,
Yeah.
sorry, you're like, "Revealed." No.
That
Um, this is also a human thing that we do, is that right now in 2025, we're still in this phase where we are demonizing carbohydrates.
Mhm.
But and we remember, I think all of us are old enough to remember the 1980s and 1990s where we were demonizing fat
Yep.
and the other 2 macronutrients were left alone. Well, not a lot of people realize back in, like, the 1920s, protein was demonized,
Oh,
and John Harvey Kellogg, the guy who brought us Kellogg's breakfast cereal, was one of the main proponents of that.
uh,
So it's cyclical, is what I'm trying to say. We
yeah,
have literally demonized all 3 of the macronutrients, and we
yes,
will continue to do that probably until the end of time. Right now, we're all very sucked into this narrative of carbs are evil, but I assure you they are not. Do a lot of people overdo them? Yes. Does
yes.
that give you agency to eat a donut the size of your face every day? No. Like, still be healthy and reasonable with it, but I guarantee you the pendulum is gonna swing and we're gonna demonize one of the other 2 macronutrients in
Yep.
our lifetime, mark my words.
Oh, that's gonna be so fun. I can't wait to see what it is next.
It's probably protein. I feel like
Okay,
especially
well,
because
yeah, next on the list.
if you're scrolling long enough on the reels, you see a lot of, like, "How I get 1,000,000 grams of protein in a day
Oh,
to lose weight," and I feel like protein is very in the spotlight now,
it
but
is.
now there's some reels coming out that are like, respectfully, you shouldn't be worried about protein, you should be worried about fiber because people are dropping dead of
Um,
colon cancer. Have you seen this trend?
I'm probably.
There's a war. I made a reel about it this
Okay,
week. I was
okay.
amused by my take on it, but yeah, so there's all this talk about colon cancer is the leading cause of death in millennial and Gen Xers now,
Really?
and again, I reemphasize this number. 95% of the American people do not get enough dietary fiber.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
I'm honestly
I'm
not
working on it
surprised by this.
myself. As a recovering keto person, that's where I struggle with not getting enough fiber
Mm,
and eating too much fat. Because when you add in
mm, yeah.
carbs, I mean, you can't just eat keto amount.
Yay!
You
I
can't
don't
just
know what
eat
you
keto
said.
amounts of fat anymore and add the carbohydrates on top of it. So that's definitely, you said you're a recovering vegetarian with the,
Mhm.
protein thing. That's definitely
Yeah.
I have a different issue that I'm working through, but fiber is one of those that I'm like,
Yeah.
I need to focus on it a little bit more. Okay. I don't know. Yeah, let's see about this one. Candibacter AR and BR, curcumin capsules, kelp capsules, and omega-3 supplements. Should I take them all together or space them out to avoid any interaction? Have an opinion on that?
Well, I'll say first off, Candibactin AR and BR are antimicrobials.
Yeah.
So those you should only need to take for maybe a couple of weeks or a month tops. So if you're taking that chronically, or said another way, if you feel the need to take them chronically, that's kind of a red flag in my mind that there's something else that you have yet to address, and there there's still something that you probably need to work on. You shouldn't be dependent on antimicrobials. And forgive me if you're not, and I'm just making that assumption incorrectly. So the Candibactin ARBR, I probably wouldn't build the protocol around because to me, those should be transient anyway. Um, that being said, I know a lot of people say that you have to take antimicrobials on an empty stomach. I played with it over the years. I don't think it matters that much, quite honestly. Curcumin, kelp, and omega 3s, though, you do want to take those with food. They all have fat soluble components to them, so they will be better absorbed with a meal that contains fat. Whether you take them all at the same meal or space them out, that's kind of just up to your personal preference. I'm really bad at taking evening supplements for some reason,
Hmm.
like dinner supplements specifically. I'm usually much more reliable taking my supplements at breakfast or lunch. So like, you can kinda weigh in something like that, but otherwise, it's just a matter of preference if you wanna space them out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very good. It looks like, well, a beach weave says now spinach and kale are demonized, but eggs are okay. It used to be kale and spinach were like the number one top health foods, and but now eggs are the number one top health food, and we got to
Yeah.
stay away from the oxalates.
I
In
was just gonna say, I was at a conference last summer. It took every ounce of self-control to not run up to the stage frothing at the mouth like a psychopath, but this woman said with a straight face that, the high oxalate foods are poison, they're toxic, and you're poisoning yourself, and I was just like, "Oh my god, I'm gonna lose my mind, I'm gonna lose my mind." Are
I
oxalates
just
important for
did a
some
video
people?
about oxalates because
Mm.
I get that comment now that I'm not keto anymore. I'm just poisoning myself with oxalates.
So here's something funny that I'll share briefly on oxalates. I personally had the highest oxalate number in urine that I've ever seen. When I used to run organic acids test, which I don't anymore, that's a whole nother story. I don't recommend it now, but back in the day when I ran oats, I personally was the record winner with my clients.
Oh,
I
congratulations.
never had a kidney stone. I never had symptoms from it that I'm aware of. But I will tell you, the height of the oxalate problem was when I was coming out of my more paleo phase, where I was desperately trying to heal my gut. So I was doing green spinach smoothies every single day in the Vitamix, and I was doing almond flour everything. Almond flour cookies, almond flour muffins, almond flour cake, almond flour breaded zucchini that was supposed to be like a mozzarella stick, but it totally was not like a mozzarella stick. All of these things were crusted in almond flour, and that's fine to a certain point, but I was way overdoing it on 2 of the highest oxalate foods, and it was a byproduct of my orthorexia and my food obsession and my restricted diet.
Yeah.
But over the years, as I broadened and diversified my diet, and I don't have to rely on almonds and spinach as much anymore, now my oxalate levels are totally fine. So for me, it wasn't anything pathological. It wasn't anything that I had to treat per se. It was a byproduct of my restricted orthorexic diet.
Yeah. Yeah. I same thing for me. I in the video I said I'm not worried about oxalates because I have zero oxalate issues that I'm aware of. But I'm also not basing my diet on spinach and almonds and, all the oxalate foods. When you have the balance and when you have a functioning gut with the
Yeah.
right, bacteria,
Mhm.
you have mechanisms to deal with these oxalates. They're not
Yeah.
oxalates. They're not just inherently poison. Again, it always comes back to where our body is at and what it can handle. So for some people, it is a poison or it feels like a poison because of whatever they have going on, but that's not like a blanket statement for all
No.
of
No,
humanity.
no, no. But again, like, does that mean everybody needs to have giant spinach smoothies every single day?
I hope
No,
not.
probably not. It's
Sounds terrible.
everything in balance. And, there's examples. I think there are a lot of examples of this in nutrition. If you overdo it on one particular food at the expense of other
Yeah,
foods, you're going to get some weird shit,
yeah,
right? Like if you eat nothing but carrots, you're going to turn orange.
yes,
And that's a thing that we know happens. You're gonna have beta carotene in the skin, and it's gonna make you look like an orange weirdo. Like, but the problem is not that beta carotene is poison. The problem is that you ate too many damn carrots, and you
exactly,
need to diversify. There was
exactly.
an episode of House about that.
Oh, nice. All right, let's have this be the last question here from Ben. What is your best advice for stimulating the vagus nerve to get gut motility moving?
Oh, I love this. This is such a good grand finale.
Yeah.
Um,
And we
okay.
talked about eating, in community and taking pleasure in your food and stuff like that. That's a good one.
Connecting with your food, yeah.
Yep.
Um, I'm gonna make an assumption maybe here, and I'm gonna go, one direction and then pivot. I wonder if this person is asking because of the popularity of vagus nerve stimulating protocols and devices.
Ah,
So there are gadgets that you can buy for a couple $100 or whatever, where you hold it up to the neck because the vagus nerve goes through the neck. So
Mhm.
you can hold it up to the neck, or you could clip something on your ear, or you could do a protocol, or I kid you not, they have essential oil blends that are marketed to stimulate your vagus nerve.
Oh, wow.
That's not it. Do they work? Technically, sure. You can stimulate the vagus nerve. But the real thing about the vagus nerve is that your nervous system is constantly assessing, are you happy? Are you safe? Are you in a position where you can really allow yourself to rest and digest and maybe be vulnerable? Right? Like, think about sleep, rest. When we sleep, we are effectively paralyzed from the neck down during that deep sleep. That's a really risky position to put yourself in. So, your nervous system is not going to let you get deep sleep unless it is totally sure that you're safe enough to do so.
Mm.
So, again, when we live our lives in fight or flight constantly, we're signaling to our nervous system that we're not safe enough to rest and we're not safe enough to digest. And so, whatever you could do to signal to your nervous system that you are safe, you are loved, you are connected, and
Mm.
you have the ability to rest and digest, that's going to be it. So, any of the so-called stress management techniques that are out there would fit into here. So things like yoga, meditation, tai chi, qigong, just getting outside and getting sunlight in general is great for the nervous system. Having a hobby, having something that you love doing. For me, clearly art, like this was born because I was way more stressed out in 2020 than I realized,
Mm.
and even though mentally I did not feel that I was super stressed, I would have told you I was handling the stress of the pandemic very well, but my body was screaming at me that that was not true, and I was losing copious amounts of hair
Mm.
just by the chunk, tons of hair. And so I kind of had a come to Jesus moment with myself and realized, hey, maybe I need a hobby. Maybe I need to do something for my vagus nerve.
Mm.
So I started this painting hobby to beautify my office, and it's persisted. Now I'm working on bookmarks for some students, so that's another thing.
Nice.
I'm doing watercolor these days.
Oh, fun.
Um, but yeah, so hobbies, interests, self-care, for some people that's going to be a bubble bath. For some people it's going to be going and playing around a basketball or tennis if
Mm.
you're into sports kind of stuff. I like going for walks in our neighborhood. That's really nice. My mom is getting into gardening, so hopefully gardening will be a hobby that I can help her with a little bit more. Um, animals.
I
Yeah.
love it. I love it when it's like a health practice that's, like, super enjoyable. Like,
Yeah.
the things you're saying, it's like, find something you enjoy, and it'll help you get healthier. It's like,
Well,
wow, like, it
bagel
doesn't have to be a cold plunge, it doesn't have to be eating liver, like, all these horrible things.
well, and, like, this is a good example too with vagal tone is that in the functional medicine, functional neurology world, they will tell you that to stimulate your vagus nerve, you get to do one of 2 things. You get to gargle vigorously until your eyes tear up, and you have to do that for 10 minutes every day of your friggin' life, which is
10
insane
minutes?
and super unappealing. Does it technically use the vagus nerve in that reflex? Yes. Is it enjoyable and making you feel loved and safe and connected and healthy? No. So it's one of those things that's, like, academically accurate,
Mhm.
but also completely missing the point of the vagal tone conversation. But yes, gargling vigorously until your eyes tear up, you have to do that, or coffee enemas. It's like, wow, those are the only 2 ways to tone our vagus nerves? Does that mean everybody has to do one of these things for the rest of their days? And I would say, no. Get a hobby,
Yeah,
manage your stress however you deem appropriate and doable for you. Get a little bit of sunshine on your cheeks and your eyeballs every now and then. Move your body. Try to reconnect with the food that you are eating and try to foster good connections, strong, enjoyable connections with the people and the world around you. And I think you'll have pretty good vagal tone.
awesome.
So,
I love that.
yeah.
Okay, I want people to know where they can find you. So you have an amazing YouTube channel. That has lots of great free information
Yeah.
on it. Same with Instagram. And then you have an amazing podcast. I am a faithful listener to your podcast, and I'm excited for the next
Yeah.
season to come out because you've been on a break. Uh,
Yep.
so it is called the IBS Freedom Podcast.
Yep.
And my personal opinion, if you want my advice, I think you should drop the I and just be the BS Freedom Podcast.
I will tell Amy that. That is fabulous. I love that.
Because well, first of all, I've never identified as someone with IBS. I've had my share of, digestive issues, but I've never been diagnosed with it. So I'm like, I would have, overlooked this. Oh, I don't have IBS and not listen. But I feel like there's so much valuable for information for anyone that's just trying to be healthy because you really do
Yeah,
focus on how to build a healthy body, which everyone can
exactly.
benefit from, whether you have IBS or not.
Yeah,
So I hope
for
that the
sure.
listeners will not, write it off just because of the I. And then you're also really, really good at just cutting through the BS and calling it out and just giving like solid information to, it's like
And
enjoy
hopefully
your
making it
food, be
practical.
happy, get a hobby, eat nutrients, like make sure you're eating, like, just like get rid of the BS.
Yeah.
So definitely recommend your podcast. And then I want you to talk a little bit about your FODMAP Freedom
Mm.
program that is coming up. You have open enrollment coming up soon. And
Yep,
like,
in
what can
April.
people expect from that if they're looking to work with you?
Yeah, totally. And I'll say briefly too that the IBS Freedom podcast is on YouTube. It has its own dedicated YouTube channel. So if you want to actually see Amy and I being goofballs, you can see us on there, or we're on all of the podcasting apps like Apple, Spotify, et cetera, if you want the audio only experience. And yeah, the next season is going to start posting in April. So right around the corner. We just recorded episode 203, I think.
Wow.
So we're getting up there in the podcasting world with numbers. But yeah, we titled it IBS Freedom because we didn't want to pigeonhole ourselves into SIBO too tightly.
Ah,
Even
yes.
though we both work with SIBO, we decided that just kind of focusing more broadly on the gut and IBS would give us a little bit more leeway to talk about other things in the gut health world. So, but we have an episode on colon cancer that we did with a naturopath friend of mine years ago. We've got an episode on IBD, some on GERD and gastritis. So I think that it really is a gut health podcast at this point, less so an IBS or SIBO specific podcast.
Yeah.
Um, and then, as you mentioned, on YouTube and Instagram, I am the gut microbiome queen. So if you just type that in, you should find me. And lots of free resources on both of those platforms. And then FODMAP Freedom is my group coaching program. That's how I work with people. That's how I help you. Like I said, I send some packages as part of that. So you get to do the prokinetic speed dating and the probiotic speed dating. But the core of it is that it's a 12-week program where I'm leading you through this process of building a healthy, resilient, strong, SIBO-proof body and a healthy, resilient, diverse microbiome that is also SIBO-proof, Candida-proof, whatever proof, insert here. One of the questions I get sometimes is, do I need to be on a low FODMAP diet to join FODMAP Freedom? And the answer is no. I'm just a sucker for cute names and alliteration. And I
Yeah.
thought that FODMAP Freedom was such a fun name, but I've had plenty of people who are not doing low FODMAP or have no aspirations of doing low FODMAP, and they still benefit. I would say FODMAP Freedom is more of an IBS, SIBO gut healing course. So if you have something in the IBS, SIBO, dysbiosis, candida, leaky gut kind of ballpark realm, I think that we can help you.
Awesome.
But yeah, it's 12 weeks. We do 4 live Q&As per week, 2 of which are with me, 2 of which are with a nutritionist who works with me. And we're there to help support you through the process of building that SIBO proof, candida proof, whatever proof body and microbiome, and figure out how to apply the stuff in everyday life. So it's
Yeah. I
kind of
love
us.
that. I love that. And like I said earlier, the way I like to describe health is like a puzzle, and you're trying to find all the pieces and put them together. And I feel like working with someone like you or a coach or, a nutritionist, whatever, it's kind of like you're hiring a professional puzzle builder.
Yeah, or like a Sherpa to lead you through a
Yeah,
journey, and I'm the one like, I brought a flashlight with me to help lead
exactly.
you through
Yes.
the cave.
Yeah, yeah, like you've
Yeah.
been through it before. Yeah. And I occasionally will get people asking me if I do like coaching or anything
Mm,
like that. And first of all, I try to say, no, please don't go to YouTubers for coaching. That's not I'm not trained for that. I have no
yeah.
credentials. I'm just trying to figure out my own health. But if I had to pick somebody that for gut health aligns with my own views, my current views on gut health and, the things that I would do, it would absolutely be Dr. Nikki. So if you ever, thought,
Mm.
hey, I wish Neely would uh, would coach me through my gut health journey, I'm not going to do it. But Dr. Nikki would be the one that I would recommend that you would go to. So definitely, take a look at all the resources. I put a bunch of links in the description, so you can check all of that out there. But Dr. Nikki, I really appreciate your time today. I feel
Mhm.
like it was an awesome conversation. I think we got so much good information out there, and I hope that we can do it again sometime. And
That'd
I
be
just
great.
really appreciate you taking the time on a Sunday afternoon.
Yeah, it flew by. I can't believe that we've been sitting here talking for 2.5 hours. That just boggles my mind.
Now we
But
need to go outside and get some sunshine on our face and some exercise
exactly.
after sitting.
Practice what we preach, right? I mean,
Yeah,
I've been hydrating, so that's at least good,
nice.
but
Yeah, me
yeah,
too. Me too. Me too.
practice what we preach, get a little sunshine on the cheeks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you everyone who joined us. Thanks for the questions and the
Yeah.
comments. And the replay will be available after, so you can go through it again because I'm sure, you got to listen to it a few times to get all of the nuggets of information.